I never thought I'd find myself writing this, but here I am, staring at the screen, heart pounding as I pour out my truth. 2 years ago, I was drowning in loneliness. An unremarkable desk job was my life, where I spent my days surrounded by the sterile hum of fluorescent lights and the barely perceptible clack of keyboards. It was a monotonous cycle until one fateful evening when I decided to take a chance on love. I'm not sure what sparked the impulse, but as I sat lamenting my void of companionship, I downloaded a dating app. At first, it was just a distraction, an escape. I found my phone buzzing with notifications, and soon I was swiping left and right, matching with profiles that ranged from quirky to boring, vague to intriguing. It all seemed so superficial, so pointless, until I saw her, a radiant smile, warm eyes, and a bio that screamed adventure. Her name was Alara, and something about her drew me in. We started talking that very night, our conversation flowing effortlessly like we had known each other for years, sharing the kinds of secrets that borders on reckless openness. Days turned into weeks, and Alara and I became inseparable, weaving a tapestry of shared laughter, midnight texts, and spontaneous plans. There was a spark, a chemistry that felt electric. Everything was perfect until one night, she confessed that she had something important to share. My heart dropped at the way she hesitated, and I remember urging her to tell me. Gathering her courage, she revealed that she had a secret, a truth shrouded in darkness. For 5 years, she had been battling a rare illness that threatened to consume her life, showing no mercy in its wake. It was a degenerative disease, a shadow looming over her every plan, every moment of joy. Each time she thought she had a handle on it, the illness would rear its head, reminding her that she couldn't just live like everyone else. I felt a mix of emotions, shock, anger, but mostly profound sadness. How had she kept this from me? But then I remembered the spark and the laughter and all the memories we had built in a short time. Instead of running away, I chose to stand by her. I took a chance. We entered a new chapter, where I became her strength. I accompanied her to doctor appointments, listened to her fears, and watched as she fought tooth and nail against the disease. Some days were far worse than others. But through every setback, she pressed on, determined to live life fully even in the face of overwhelming odds. I learned to cherish every moment, as the future seemed so precarious. One evening, after a particularly difficult treatment, Alara asked me to take her to a carnival. I hesitated, the idea of crowds felt overwhelming, but she insisted, wanting to reclaim a piece of normalcy. I reluctantly agreed, and we spent the night gorging on cotton candy and laughing as we played ridiculous games. It felt so liberating, so free, like we could pretend for a night that obstacles didn't exist. At the Ferris wheel, as the world dropped away beneath us, Alara turned to me, her eyes sparkling with mischief. "I want you to promise me something," she said, her voice trembling slightly. I nodded, eager to say yes to anything that would keep her laughing. "No matter what happens, promise me you will not give up on love," she said, her expression shifting from carefree to serious. It hit me hard. She was aware of the fragility of life, and she wanted to ensure that I would find happiness, even without her. "I promise," I replied, meaning every word, though I desperately wished I'd never have to test that promise. As weeks passed, the severity of her condition began to take its toll. Energies drained, smiles faded, and those moments of levity became fewer and further between. There were days when she couldn't even lift her head off the pillow. I watched, helpless, as the illness stole piece after piece of my beautiful Alara. But I refused to give up on her, and I clung to the promise I had made. As the winter holidays approached, I wanted to give her a gift that would make her smile, something to showcase how I felt. I gathered all our pictures, all our moments, and made a scrapbook filled with memories we made together. I poured my heart into every page, hoping it would remind her of strength and love. But when I presented it to her, there were tears in her eyes. I thought they were tears of happiness, but instead, she whispered that I deserved someone who was whole, someone who could give back as much as I gave her. Her words pierced through me like a knife. I tried to argue, but deep down, I understood what she meant. Love was supposed to lift us, not anchor us down. In the weeks that followed, Alara's health continued to decline, and finally, one cold February morning, the call I had dreaded came. Her family needed me. Rushing to the hospital, I didn't want to entertain the thought of a goodbye. The moment I entered her room, I could see the fight was nearly gone. Alara gazed at me, her eyes heavy but light with remembrance. "Promise me," she whispered softly, "that you will live." I mean really live. I choked back tears, knowing that saying goodbye was inevitable. We held each other for what seemed like an eternity, but in reality, it was a fleeting moment suspended in time. I kissed her forehead and promised. A week later, she left this world, taking with her a piece of my heart. I kept my promise, eventually. It was hard. The days turned into months, and I found myself wandering aimlessly. Loneliness closed in like a dark cloud, and while I grieved, I never forgot the lesson she had taught me: love was worth the risk, no matter the outcome. It was 6 months later, during a simple coffee break, that I met someone new. Her name was Mia. We talked about everything and nothing, and it felt strangely comforting to share laughter again. I hesitated, unsure if I was ready. But Alara's words echoed in my mind. Reluctantly at first, I allowed myself to fall into this new connection, nurturing the memory of the past while allowing myself to hope for the future. Love had offered me happiness, even amidst despair, and I learned that while true love could hurt deeply, it could also heal and help you grow. As I write this, I realize that taking a chance on love saved me. It turned my heartache into a beacon of hope, a reminder that life, in all its fragility, is worth living. So, here I am, embracing love once more, with Alara forever in my heart, urging me on in this unpredictable journey.
At precisely 11 p.m. every night, my wife begins to cry, her muffled sobs echoing through the thin walls of our modest home, a haunting serenade that's become my grim lullaby. It started 3 months ago, just days after she returned from her mother's funeral, leaving behind not just a whisper of grief but something far more unsettling, something I'd come to fear in the quiet hours when darkness envelops our lives. At first, I thought it was just the weight of her loss, an understandable expression of sorrow that would eventually fade away as time offered its familiar comfort, but as the nights dragged on, her tears became a source of unease, filling the air with a strange, suffocating tension that made my heart pound and sleep impossible. I tried to console her, offering words of love and support, but she would only shake her head, her eyes downcast as if the very act of looking at me was too much to bear. Some nights, I would sit up in bed, listening to the soft, desperate whimpers that clawed at my insides, feeling helpless but not willing to intrude upon her grief. Yet deep down, an instinct told me something was terribly wrong. It wasn't just the sadness, it was the unmistakable feeling that her sorrow was fueled by something more than memories and loss. One evening, driven by concern and fear, I mustered the courage to enter the dimly lit room where my wife sat, the faint glow of the clock casting morose shadows across her face, and as I pulled her into a tentative embrace, her sobs became sharp and jagged, transforming into gasps as though each breath was ripped from her chest. She whispered a name between tears, Lila, and I froze, recognizing it as her younger sister who died tragically in a car accident years prior, a pain buried beneath layers of familial duty and unspoken words. As I tried to scratch the surface of her grief, she suddenly recoiled, her gaze wide and wild, filled with a terror I hadn't seen before, and she uttered a chilling phrase that sent chills cascading down my spine. "She's calling for me." The statement hung heavily in the air, and my rational mind scurried to dismiss the idea, attributing it to emotional turmoil. But that night I found little solace in slumber, instead lying awake with dread pooling in my stomach, plagued by thoughts of what she might mean, whether Lila's soul hungered for her, or if there was something lurking on the edge of our lives. The following nights were even worse, the crying evolving into a haunting melody, an intimate lamenting fused with an otherworldly cadence that danced around the edges of my consciousness. I began to research, combing through articles and forums, digging up folklore about spirits and the connections we share, and my obsession grew until I made a discovery. Often, it is said, the departed return to those who grieve them, trying to take them away. Desperation washed over me, and I sought out help: psychics, mediums, anyone who might make sense of my wife's nightly torment. One evening, I brought a local medium home, a vivacious woman with eerily sharp features who waved her hands as if conjuring spirits from the depths of the shadows. My wife sat on the edge of the couch, staring blankly at the floor while the medium began the ritual, lighting candles and whispering secrets known only to the unseen. Within moments, the room felt stifling, tension thickening like fog, and then, to my horror, my wife began to cry again, but this time, her sobs morphed into pleading wails that were an echo of rage, confusion, and fear. The medium's demeanor shifted to one of alarm as if she sensed an uninvited presence in the room. With shaking hands, she asked what I had unleashed by summoning her sister, but I was oblivious, taking her words as hints of superstition. Then, inexplicably, the medium recoiled as if slapped, her voice trembling as she whispered, "There's something else here." something she's unaware of, and before I could ask for clarification, my wife burst free from the couch, her eyes wide and unrecognizable, fractured by shadows that danced behind her gaze, as she screamed Lila's name, mingling the past with the present. The lights flickered as if the very house lamented the souls trapped in its walls, and amidst it all, the medium faded into fear, becoming an unwitting prisoner of our haunting. I had no choice but to intervene, grasping my wife's shoulders in a desperate bid to bring her back into this reality, and with a frantic jerk, I pulled her into me, whispering reassurances, yet within seconds, her anguished cries turned into a sound of sheer terror, and she began to shake violently as her body fought against something invisible, something rooted deep within her that had awoken that night. Against my better judgment, I plunged into the murky depths of our past, uncovering family secrets and whispered fears until finally, I stumbled across a worn journal that detailed Lila's tragic life. It contained tales of a darkness that followed her, a bitterness that seeped into her very essence before her untimely end, and in those words, I found the truth, a binding curse meant to lead through bloodlines, to drown the living in the desolation left behind by the dead. As the hour approached 11 p.m. again, dread coiling around my throat, I felt the tremors begin in my wife's body, the weeping manifesting anew, and this time, I feared for my life as well as hers. Instead of words, I gathered every ounce of love I could muster and pressed tightly against her, shutting my eyes against the encroaching horror of that inevitable witching hour, hoping to stave off my impending fate. In that moment, I knew Lila's spirit didn't merely seek to contact us but demanded revenge, her cries ripping through the fabric of our existence, and as I braced for the relentless vortex of rage and sorrow to engulf us, the last flicker of light succumbed to the darkness, leaving only the sound of my wife's cries, echoing in a way that felt all too real, an anguished plea that whispered from the depths of despair, forever ringing in my ears. And that's when I understood, sometimes, the dead don't just visit, sometimes, they come to collect.
My husband's family expects me to pay for their lavish vacation. I never thought I'd be in a situation like this, but here I am, caught in the crosshairs of family expectations and financial burden. My husband, Ben, and I had always enjoyed a comfortable life together, but we weren't wealthy by any means. We worked hard for what we had, saving up for vacations and special moments. That's why, when Ben's family announced their plans for a lavish vacation to a tropical paradise, I felt a pit forming in my stomach. It was meant to be a joyful reunion, a way for everyone to bond and celebrate family togetherness. But when the family group chat lit up with excitement about the trip, I noticed something alarming: the assumption that I would contribute significantly to the cost. At first, I tried to brush it off as a misunderstanding. I was busy with work and preparing for our upcoming move, so I didn't have time to engage in the chatter. But when I received a direct message from Ben's sister, Chloe, it became clear that my silence had been interpreted as agreement. "Hey, we're counting on you to help cover some of the expenses for the vacation. It's going to be amazing, and it wouldn't be the same without you." I felt my heart sink. My mind raced as I processed the implications. Why should I be expected to pay for a vacation that I hadn't even planned for? I messaged Ben, hoping to get his support. "Can you talk to your family about this? I don't think it's fair for me to shoulder part of the cost." Ben's response was disappointing. "They're just excited, and they've always seen you as part of the family. Can't you help out a little? It'll mean a lot to them." I felt a mix of anger and confusion. Why was he siding with them? I had always been there for his family, supporting their events and gatherings, but this felt different. It felt like an obligation rather than a choice. Days turned into a week, and the pressure mounted. Chloe and Ben's parents kept messaging me about the trip, sending links to luxurious resorts, lavish dinners, and excursions that were far beyond our budget. "We'll all pitch in, and it'll be unforgettable," they said, but I knew that my pitching in meant far more than a share of the costs. It meant sacrificing my own hard-earned savings. One evening, as I sat on the couch, scrolling through the family chat, I saw that Ben's cousin had posted a photo of a stunning villa they wanted to stay at, along with a breakdown of costs that sent my heart racing. "We can each chip in $1,500. It'll be worth it." I stared at the screen in disbelief. This was outrageous. I could feel my blood boiling as I typed a response, only to stop myself. I didn't want to cause conflict, but I also couldn't just let this slide. That night, I confronted Ben. "I can't go through with this. I can't pay that much for a vacation that's supposed to be a family trip. It feels wrong," he sighed, running his fingers through his hair. "They're just excited. Can't you try to see it from their perspective? It's not like they're asking for a lot. Not a lot. I shot back, my voice rising. That's a significant amount of money for us. I don't understand why I'm being pressured into this. He looked at me, frustration etched on his face. It's family. Just think about how much it would mean to them. They don't have a lot of chances to get together like this. I felt utterly alone. It seemed like I was fighting a losing battle against expectations, and I couldn't understand why Ben couldn't see my side. Over the next few days, the pressure mounted further. I was bombarded with messages from his family, each one more insistent than the last. We're counting on you. It'll be so much fun. You can't let us down. It felt like a wave of guilt was crashing over me, pulling me under. I decided to take a stand. I texted the family group chat, stating clearly that while I loved them and wanted to be part of the trip, I could not afford to contribute in the way they expected. The response was immediate and explosive. What do you mean you can't help out? This is a family vacation. We're all in this together. I felt a knot tighten in my stomach as the messages flew back and forth. Ben's family, the same people I had spent years growing close to, turned on me in an instant. I read their messages, feeling the sting of their words. Selfish. Ungrateful. I was taken aback by how quickly their support turned to hostility. My heart raced, and I could feel the panic rising. Ben tried to mediate, but his efforts only fueled the fire. You're making them feel bad, he said. You don't want to ruin this for everyone, do you? I felt crushed, like the very ground beneath me was crumbling away. I had stood my ground, yet it felt like I was the one being punished. The emotional toll was exhausting. I tried to focus on work, but my mind kept drifting back to the family drama. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was losing a part of my family. One night, after an especially tense day, I heard Ben on the phone with his mom, his voice hushed but filled with urgency. I could make out bits of their conversation, and my heart sank as I heard her say, maybe she's just not the right fit for our family. I felt a wave of nausea wash over me. Was this really happening? My stomach twisted with anxiety as I realized that the family I had loved and supported for years was now questioning my place among them because I wouldn't pay for their lavish vacation. I confronted Ben afterward, my voice shaking with hurt. How could you let them talk about me like that? I thought we were a team. He looked guilty but defensive. You need to understand. They're just trying to include you, and maybe you should consider that they're right. You don't want to be the one who ruins this for everyone. His words struck me like a slap to the face. It felt like I was standing on the edge of a cliff, teetering between the life I had built with Ben and the reality of being pushed away by his family. The following days felt like an emotional roller coaster. I spent countless hours scrolling through their group chat, seeing them make plans and jokes, all while I felt like an outsider. Finally, the day of the trip arrived, and I was a bundle of nerves. I had made it clear I wouldn't be attending, but part of me wished I could just pack my bags and join them, ignoring the hurt and resentment. As I watched them board the plane and the group photos flooding my feed, I felt a profound sense of loss wash over me. It was as if I was witnessing my life slipping through my fingers. I realized I had sacrificed my own happiness to fit into a mold that no longer served me. In the weeks that followed, Ben and I struggled to find common ground. He was torn between his family and his wife, and the tension hung in the air like a storm cloud. I could sense the frustration building between us, and as much as I wanted to bridge the gap, every attempt felt futile. Then, one day, I received a message from Ben. I think it's best if we take a break. The words shattered me. My heart raced as I read and reread the message, hoping it was a mistake. But deep down, I knew this was the reality I had feared. I had stood my ground for what I believed in, but now I was facing the consequences. As the days turned into weeks, I began to pick up the pieces of my shattered life. I focused on my work, threw myself into my hobbies, and started to rediscover who I was outside of my relationship with Ben. The pain was raw, but I slowly learned to accept that sometimes, standing up for yourself meant facing difficult choices. In the end, I learned that love shouldn't come with a price tag, and family shouldn't demand sacrifices that push you away. It was a painful journey, but it was one I had to take to find my own strength. I learned to embrace the power of self-worth, even if it meant letting go of what I thought was a forever kind of love. If you're reading this, know that it's okay to set boundaries, to say no, and to prioritize your own happiness. Sometimes, the hardest choices lead to the most profound growth, and no one should ever feel obligated to pay for someone else's dreams at the cost of their own happiness.
When I moved into my new apartment, I was excited about the fresh start, brushing off the cracked walls and faded paint as mere character. However, the packages that flooded my doorstep were a different story altogether. They were all addressed to the previous tenant, a name I had never heard before, Calvin Wexler. I figured I could just return them to the post office, but curiosity gnawed at me like a rat gnawing through old cheese, so one rainy afternoon, when the sky was as gray as my mood, I decided to open one. It was a plain brown box with no return address, and inside was a single leather-bound journal, its spine cracked and pages yellowed with age. An unsettling chill curled through my stomach as I flipped through the journal, the fine, careful handwriting of Calvin merging with erratic sketches of eyes, each more unsettling than the last. At first, they looked like doodles, but with each page turn, the eyes morphed. Some were wide and bulging, others narrowed with a malicious glare, but one particular drawing felt different. It was a large eye with a hauntingly intricate florid design surrounding it, and under it, in shaky scribble, were the words "They see me." My mind raced, and suddenly the apartment took on an oppressive silence, as if the very walls were tightening around me. I couldn't shake the feeling that Calvin had been spiraling into something deeply unsettling before I'd even stepped foot in the apartment. The next day, I reluctantly returned to the box, flipping through pages more hurriedly now, gut-wrenching dread pulling at me. As I reached the back, the sketches grew darker, the eyes more sinister, and in disjointed entries, Calvin spoke of being watched, of shadows lurking in the corners of his home, creeping closer each night. Desperation oozed from the paper, his final entry demanding a warning to the next occupant: "They watch from the mirrors." I glanced around my own apartment, the once cozy arrangement now feeling like a trap, especially with the antique mirror that hung above the mantel, the only thing that had caught my eye when I signed the lease. It was an ornate piece. I thought it added character, but now the way it seemed to glimmer in the low light made me shiver. I couldn't manage to sleep that night. Calvin's words echoed in my mind, mixing with my paranoia in a swirling concoction of dread and disbelief. With every creak of the floor, every groan of the pipes, I pictured the eyes highlighted in the journal, staring, watching, judging. The following evening, unable to resist the pull of inevitability, I stood before the mirror, heart racing like a hummingbird's wings. Slowly, I leaned in closer, half expecting the reflection to warp, to reveal some horrific truth, but it only showed my anxious self, eyes wide, lips trembling. As I turned away, ready to dismiss Calvin's warning as mere delusion, I caught a flicker, a shadow that moved across the glass, and my breath hitched. I pressed my hands against the cool surface, peering into the depths of my reflection, half hoping to see something, anything, but the glass was dark and still, a foreign dimension that held tight to its secrets. Then, in a horrifying moment of clarity, my pulse loud in my ears like a war drum, I remembered the final entry I had skimmed. It had mentioned mirrors, but deeper still, it had noted how he lost track of time, felt like days were hours and hours felt as if they stretched infinitely. A creeping sensation of déjà vu wrapped around my consciousness, numbing the back of my neck. I stumbled back, heart racing, and thought of Calvin. Perhaps this wasn't a tale of madness but a harrowing reality. I sensed a presence in the room, an overwhelming heaviness pressing upon me. Turning back to the mirror, I found my own reflection shifting, and for the first time, I noticed the eyes behind me, dark and hollow as they began to reach out like shadows trying to break free, fingers curling against the glass. In a fevered attempt to regain control, I grabbed at the journal but felt an unseen force pulling me closer to the mirror, the dark void sucking me in. I screamed, a raw, primal sound, as my hands flailed against the cool surface, but the grip of the dark was stronger, like chains wrapping around my sanity. My vision blurred, swirling winds of shadow replaced the comforting familiarity of my apartment. My voice echoed in a whispering cacophony, urging me to turn away, to resist, but something much more primal was devouring my resolve. Then silence, deathly silence, enveloped me as the last shred of my existence thinned to nothingness in the mirror's reflection, now gilded with the haunting reminder of that final sketch. I woke up in my own bed, drenched in sweat, heart hammering like a prisoner caught in the throes of escape. The mirror seemed to glimmer innocently in the morning light as if mocking my existential crisis. But then a shiver ripped through me as I saw it, my reflection, grinning back at me with Calvin's unsettling smile, eyes glinting malevolently, and a whisper that practically doused my spirit, they still see us.
I regret not taking a chance, a story of missed opportunities. It's funny how life works sometimes. You don't even realize when the moments that could change everything are slipping through your fingers, not until it's too late. I didn't realize it when I had the chance. I was young, reckless, and filled with that strange confidence that only comes from being naive enough to think nothing could go wrong. But looking back, I wish I had known then what I know now. It was a few years ago, during my last year of college. I was stuck in a routine, waking up for classes, spending hours in the library, hanging out with friends when I had the time, and doing my best to avoid thinking about what would come next. I didn't really know what I wanted out of life, and that uncertainty made me hesitant. I had a friend, Sophie. She was the complete opposite of me, spontaneous, adventurous, and always up for something new. We'd met during freshman year, and even though we were different in almost every way, we became close. She was the kind of person who'd drag me out of my comfort zone, convincing me to go to that party I didn't want to attend, or to skip class just to take a walk with her through the city. She was also the type to chase after what she wanted, no hesitation. I admired that about her, but I didn't think I could live like that. I was always too cautious, too afraid of making the wrong choice, of doing something that might screw up my future. Sophie, though, she didn't care. She had this dream of moving to New York City after graduation. She talked about it constantly, how she wanted to be a photographer, how she could picture herself walking the streets, capturing moments, living her dream. I thought she was crazy. I'd never been to the city, but I didn't think someone like her, someone with big aspirations and no backup plan, would make it. I was happy to stay where I was, taking the safe route, aiming for the job I thought I should have. But Sophie, she made things happen. I'll never forget the night she sat me down in our favorite cafe, the one we used to go to when we needed to talk. She looked serious, her eyes wide, as if she had something important to say. She told me she had been offered a photography internship in New York. It wasn't just any internship, it was with a major agency, one that could open doors to the kind of career she'd always dreamed of. I remember how excited she was, how she practically glowed when she spoke about it. But she also told me something that I didn't expect. She wanted me to come with her. She didn't want to go alone, and she thought we'd be great together in the city, both of us starting fresh, finding our way. She said she needed someone who knew her, someone who could help her settle in and keep her grounded while she took risks. And there it was, the choice that could have changed everything. I could have said yes. I could have thrown caution to the wind, packed up my life, and gone with her. But instead, I did what I always did. I hesitated. I asked her about the risks, about how we would make it in such a big city, how I would get a job. I asked her how we would afford rent, how I would even survive in a place like that. She tried to reassure me, saying we could figure it out together, that she knew people who could help, that we had time to plan. But I couldn't get past the fear. The fear of failure, the fear of not being good enough, the fear of leaving everything behind. I couldn't do it. So I told her no. I said I wasn't ready, that I needed to stay where I was, that I had a future to build, and New York wasn't part of it. Sophie was disappointed, but she didn't push. She understood, or at least, I thought she did. She ended up moving to New York by herself, and I stayed behind. For a while, I convinced myself that I had made the right decision. I told myself that I was being practical, that my future was too important to risk it all on a whim. I threw myself into my studies, got a job in the city, and kept moving forward, just like everyone else. But the truth is, I didn't stop thinking about Sophie. She kept in touch, sending me photos of her adventures in the city, photos of iconic places, people, and moments that I knew I could have been a part of if I had just taken that leap. It was hard not to feel a pang of regret each time I saw her photos on social media, or heard her talk about the new friends she had made, the projects she was working on, the people she was meeting. It was even harder when she would call me, her voice filled with excitement as she told me how much she loved it there, how everything was falling into place. And then one day, I got the message. It was from Sophie. It had been months since we last talked in person, and this was the first time in a while that she had called me directly. I met someone, she said, her voice trembling with emotion. I met someone who sees me, who gets me. I think I've finally found what I was looking for. I didn't know how to respond. I wanted to be happy for her, but a part of me couldn't shake the feeling of loss. It wasn't that I wanted to be the one for her, it was the fact that I had missed out on everything. I had missed out on the chance to take risks, to change my life, to follow a dream that wasn't even mine but felt like it could have been. I had chosen the safe route, the easy route, and now it was too late to go back. That was when it hit me. I had wasted so much time, so many years, being afraid to take chances, being afraid to fail. I had passed up so many opportunities because I didn't want to mess up, but in the process, I had missed out on everything. Sophie had taken the leap, and now she was living the life she had always dreamed of. Meanwhile, I was stuck in the same place, in the same routine, wondering where it all went wrong. I tried to convince myself that it wasn't too late, that I could still make a change, that I could still take chances. But deep down, I knew I had missed my window. I had missed my chance to be a part of something bigger, to live a life that wasn't dictated by fear and uncertainty. And as I sat in my small apartment that night, alone with my thoughts, I realized that I would always regret not taking that chance. Maybe it's the fear that holds us back, or maybe it's just the way we convince ourselves that we're not ready for change. But one thing is certain, when you let those opportunities slip away, when you let fear rule your choices, you'll find yourself looking back with nothing but regret. So, if you're reading this and you're standing at a crossroads, unsure of what to do, unsure of whether to take the leap, do it. Take the chance. Don't wait until it's too late like I did. Because one day, you'll realize that the opportunity you passed up was the one that could have changed everything. And you'll wish you had taken it. I never thought my anxiety would lead me to such an unusual encounter, one that both terrified and transformed me. I used to dread public settings, crowded cafes, busy elevators, even the local grocery store. Just thinking about being around other people set my mind racing, my heart pounding in my chest like it was trying to escape. On that particular Thursday evening, I had just finished another grueling week at work, and my best friend, Mia, urged me to join her at an art exhibit downtown. "It'll be fun," she insisted, her excitement palpable over the phone. But all I could focus on was the idea of being surrounded by crowds, strangers brushing past me, and the constant chatter that would surely drown out my thoughts. For days, I tried to convince myself to say no. But eventually, after a combination of guilt and a desire to break out of my self-imposed isolation, I relented. "Fine, I'll go, but only for a little while," I reluctantly replied. As the time approached, I prepared myself, donning a comfortable sweater and my most grounding pair of sneakers. My palms were clammy, my stomach churned with unease as I stepped out of my front door, but I pushed through and hopped on the subway, hardly able to focus on anything besides the growing sense of dread gnawing at me. The neon lights and rushing sounds blurred into a surreal dreamscape until I found myself finally at the gallery doors, where Mia greeted me with a wide grin. I wished I could share her enthusiasm, but the way my heart was racing made me feel like a deer caught in headlights. The gallery was packed, an overwhelming sea of bodies moving from one exhibit to the next. I stood stiffly at the entrance, my breath quickening and my head spinning as I scanned the room. The walls adorned with vivid art pieces seemed to swirl in front of my eyes, and I struggled to focus on any one. I felt a tightness in my chest, the panic creeping in slowly. Mia grabbed my hand, and we made our way toward a large piece that resembled a chaotic explosion of color. "Isn't it beautiful?" she cooed. I wanted to agree, but all I could think about was how to escape without making a scene. Just then, I caught sight of a woman across the room who seemed to be staring right at me. I had never seen her before, but something about her seemed familiar. It was as if she existed beyond the realm of typical strangers, standing out against the vibrant backdrop of the gallery. She wore a deep purple dress that flowed like liquid amethyst around her, and her dark hair cascaded over her shoulders like a waterfall. I blinked, and for a moment, it felt like the world around us dimmed, the chatter fading into silence. Her eyes locked onto mine, and I instinctively looked away, letting out a shaky breath. I was in the middle of an internal battle. I wanted to leave, but something anchored my feet to the floor. Mia tugged me toward another painting, and I felt enormous guilt rising. It was all too much. Before I could process my thoughts, I turned to Mia, my voice barely above a whisper. "I think I'm going to head out." "No, please don't," she pleaded, her grip tightening on my arm. "Just breathe. We've barely started. Can we try to enjoy this together?" That's when I looked back at the woman, and to my astonishment, she had moved closer. In the thrumming chaos of the exhibit, she appeared as a calm presence amidst the storm. I held my breath, and somehow, her expression managed to ground me. It was as if she could see my anxiety without me saying a word. I tried to persuade myself that this was all in my head, a figment of my imagination trying to make sense of the overwhelming environment around me. But the woman tilted her head slightly, inviting me to come closer without uttering a single word. Against better judgment, I found myself drifting away from Mia, who was completely engrossed in her own conversation. I approached the woman, my heart hammering. Hi, I said, scarcely believing I had broken the silence. Hi, she replied with a melodic, soothing voice that seemed to wrap around me like a warm embrace. I sensed you were struggling. The energy in this place can be overwhelming, can't it? At that moment, her understanding flooded over me like a wave, washing away some of the tension that had been clenching my chest. Yes, it really is. I heard myself say, amazed that I could speak so freely without feeling the suffocating waves of anxiety crashing down. Would you like to take a walk? She suggested, gesturing toward a quieter corner of the gallery. I hesitated, torn between my instincts to flee and the unexpected comfort I felt in her presence. I glanced back at Mia, who was in deep conversation, oblivious to my plight. The woman smiled warmly, extending her hand. Something about her felt trustworthy, calming, a stark contrast to everything else in that chaotic exhibit. I nodded, and we walked, side by side, into a more serene space. We stopped in front of a large abstract painting, the brushstrokes swirling around like a tempest. Art has a way of speaking to us, she said. Did you know that many people find solace in viewing art? It can act as a mirror to our feelings. I listened intently, mesmerized by her passion. Talking with her felt like therapy, like she was unlocking the wall I had built around myself. We stood in silence, letting the colors of the painting wash over us, and slowly, I found myself breathing easier. What's your name? I finally ventured, breaking the magical moment. I'm Alara, she replied, her eyes sparkling with a wisdom that suggested she had experienced these emotional battles herself. And you? I'm Sam, I said, a smile creeping onto my face, surprised at how natural this felt. So, how do you cope with anxiety in public? I asked, curious. Most people count to 10 or focus on something around them, but for me, it helps to connect with nature, I chuckled, not fully understanding how that applied to a crowded gallery, but intrigued by her insight. Maybe you could try it next time, Sam. Close your eyes for a moment. What do you hear? I felt a little silly, but I obliged, closing my eyes. The ambient noise faded into a hum, and for the first time that night, I wasn't only listening to the din of the crowd or feeling the weight of my anxiety, I began to hear snippets of laughter, the click of cameras, the gentle rustle of fabric as people moved. In that moment, I realized I wasn't ultimately alone in this chaos. I opened my eyes, looking at Alara. Something overwhelming shifted inside me, as if her words had crafted a lifeline through my turmoil. Thank you, Alara, I murmured, my heart lifted from a place of dread to one of possibility. She smiled knowingly, and I felt a connection that transcended our brief encounter. Just remember, the world can overwhelm us, but we have the power to connect with it. Take small steps, find what grounds you. You're stronger than your anxiety. With that, she turned away, giving me space. Mia popped into view, eyebrows raised. Where did you go? I was looking for you everywhere. She seemed oblivious to the encounter I'd just experienced, and for a moment, I hesitated, afraid that if I spoke about Alara, I might lose that sense of connection. But as I opened my mouth, I realized my fear was loosening its grip, fading like the sounds of the gallery. I met someone amazing, I finally said. I think I'll be okay. It wouldn't be the last time I faced anxiety, but in that moment, enveloped by the chaos of the evening, I held on to the wisdom Alara had unknowingly gifted me. I felt lighter, more present, as we moved through the exhibit together. Against the vibrant backdrop of color, sounds, and strangers, I found my own space to breathe, one small victory at a time. Thank you for listening to my story. I've always been a person plagued by anxiety. Ever since I was a kid, I felt like there was a suffocating weight on my chest, a constant apprehension that the world around me was one wrong step away from collapsing. My parents dismissed it as a phase, my friends thought it was just part of my introverted nature, but I knew it was more. It wasn't until after college, during a particularly stressful job hunt, that my anxiety transformed into something far darker. It started with insomnia, those relentless nights where every tick of the clock sent my heart racing. The shadows in my room morphed into sinister figures, whispering all my fears back at me. I'd wake up in cold sweats, convinced that something wicked was lurking just beyond the edge of my nightstand. My therapist suggested meditation and mindfulness, but those only seemed to amplify my restlessness. I would sit cross-legged on the floor, focusing on my breath, and soon enough, my breathing would become erratic. Instead of finding calm, I would spiral deeper into a pit of dread. Then came the turning point. One fateful night, after a particularly long day at work filled with endless rejection emails, I threw myself onto the couch and started scrolling mindlessly through a social media feed. That's when I stumbled upon a post about an old abandoned mental institution on the outskirts of town. The post claimed it was haunted, filled with the tormented spirits of patients long gone, and featured eerie photographs that sent chills down my spine. Suddenly, I felt an unsettling thrill. What if I could confront my anxiety in a place that housed its own ghosts? What if I could find a piece of myself amidst the shadows? That's how I ended up driving to that forsaken location the next day. The sun had barely risen when I pulled up to the crumbling structure. Vines crawled up the decaying bricks as if nature were trying to reclaim what man had abandoned. The air was thick with unease, but also with anticipation. I stepped out of my car and took a deep breath, feeling the cool morning air touch my skin. I armed myself with a flashlight and pushed open the rickety front door. It creaked like a long-forgotten memory, echoing my own apprehension as I stepped inside. Dust particles danced in the beams of my flashlight, and the smell of mildew wrapped around me like a familiar, yet unsettling embrace. I walked through the darkened corridors, each echo of my footsteps amplifying the racing of my heart. The walls were lined with peeling paint and remnants of old photographs, faces blurred but still staring back at me, eternally frozen in pain. It felt like they were imploring me to understand their stories, as if I were their silent witness. I ventured deeper, negotiating my way through scattered debris, when I heard the faint sound of a child's laughter echoing behind me. I froze. My brain screamed for me to leave, but my feet felt glued to the floor. I turned slowly, my flashlight cutting through the shadows, revealing nothing but emptiness. The laughter ceased, and a chilly breeze swept through the hall, sending a shiver down my spine. My instincts told me to run, yet something within me urged me to stay. I chose to confront what scared me. I sat down in one of the dusty rooms, the remnants of forgotten lives surrounding me. I closed my eyes, focused on my breathing, letting the panic wash over me like a wave. I tried to visualize my anxiety, the feelings of dread, fear, and isolation. Instead of fighting against it, I let it come. It felt like a tidal wave crashing down, but in that moment, instead of succumbing to despair, I envisioned wrapping that wave into a warm blanket. I told my anxiety that it was okay to exist, that it could sit with me for a while. As I opened my eyes, the atmosphere shifted. No longer did I feel like a visitor in a haunt, I felt like a ghost freed from its chains. The shadows no longer loomed menacingly, they had transformed into quiet companions. I stayed there for hours, reminiscing, confronting memories long buried, and releasing thoughts that had once strangled me. The child's laughter returned, this time gentle and soothing, as though it were a reminder that joy still existed beneath the layers of anguish. I realized in that moment that my anxiety wasn't an enemy, it was a part of me, a reflection of my sensitivity and fears. I walked through the halls again, more confidently this time. The whispers felt less like accusations and more like echoes of stories needing to be told. I stopped to touch the old photographs, imagining the lives they once held, the hopes, dreams, and countless battles fought in silence. As the sun dipped in the sky, I made my way back outside, leaving the abandoned institution with a newfound sense of peace. My anxiety hadn't vanished, it was still there, pulsing beneath the surface, but I'd learned to coexist with it. I drove home that night, the sky painted with the warm hues of sunset and my heart lighter than it had been in years. I realized I had confronted the very essence of what once terrified me, the fear of being lost, of being without control. Instead, I found strength in vulnerability, realizing that every ghost we confront teaches us something invaluable. Anxiety was no longer a weight dragging me down, it was a part of my existence, a companion guiding me to find balance in chaos. I wrote this to share not only my journey but to remind others that facing our fears doesn't always mean banishing them, sometimes, it means inviting them to sit at the table of our lives. Because in doing so, we discover that peace is not the absence of fear, but the ability to embrace it wholeheartedly. The time I gave advice and it backfired spectacularly. It was supposed to be a simple thing, giving a piece of advice to a friend, something I thought would help them. At the time, I had no idea how badly it would backfire. It all started one Friday afternoon when I met up with my friend Mark at our usual spot, a coffee shop near our office. Mark had been struggling with his relationship for a while. He'd been dating Lisa for nearly a year, and things weren't going great. There was constant tension between them, and he couldn't seem to figure out why. It wasn't that they didn't love each other, it was more like they were two people who had drifted apart but couldn't let go. He had been asking for my advice for weeks, but I'd never been able to offer anything concrete. That day, however, something changed. He sat across from me, his hands wrapped tightly around his coffee cup, looking like a man on the edge. "I don't know what to do, man. I feel like every time I try to talk to Lisa, she shuts me down. I don't even know if I can keep doing this," he said, his voice a mixture of frustration and despair. I could see the desperation in his eyes, and for some reason, I felt compelled to offer him some words of wisdom. I wasn't an expert on relationships, but I'd had my fair share of ups and downs. "Look, man," I said, leaning in, "sometimes in relationships, you have to put yourself first. If you're feeling unhappy, if you're feeling like things aren't working, you need to communicate that. But you also need to take a step back and think about what you truly want. You've got to be honest with yourself and with her." I could see Mark nodding, taking in my words, and for a moment, I thought he was really starting to get it. He looked like he was relieved, like he had finally heard something that made sense to him. That's actually not a bad idea," he said, his face brightening up. "I think I'm going to do it. I'm going to tell her how I feel, and maybe we can work through it." I felt a surge of confidence in that moment. I thought I had helped him. I thought that maybe my advice would be the thing that turned things around for him. The next week, however, things took a drastic turn. I didn't hear from Mark for a few days, and when I finally did, it wasn't at all what I had expected. I got a text message from him that read, "Hey, we need to talk. It's about Lisa." My heart sank. I had no idea what had happened, but I feared the worst. I immediately called him, and after a few rings, he picked up. His voice sounded flat, almost defeated. "Hey, what's going on?" I asked, trying to keep my tone casual, though I could feel the anxiety creeping up. "Dude, it's bad. I took your advice. I sat Lisa down, told her exactly how I felt, told her I needed space, that things weren't working, and she just exploded," Mark said, his voice cracking. I sat there in stunned silence for a moment, trying to process what he was saying. "What do you mean, exploded?" I asked cautiously. "She just lost it. Started yelling at me, calling me selfish, saying I didn't care about her." I tried to stay calm, but the more I tried to explain, the worse it got. "She packed up her stuff and left. It's over, man. I don't know what to do." I could hear the pain in his voice, and I felt a lump form in my throat. I had no idea that my advice would have such a devastating impact. I had no idea that telling him to be honest about his feelings would lead to a breakup. "I didn't mean for this to happen," I said, my mind racing. "Maybe you should try talking to her again, explain that you didn't mean to hurt her." "I did." Mark interrupted, frustration creeping into his voice. "I've been calling her nonstop, trying to fix it, but she won't pick up. It's like I don't even exist to her anymore." I was speechless. I didn't know what to say. I felt responsible for the mess that had been made. What was supposed to be a simple piece of advice had spiraled into something far worse. I spent the next few days trying to help Mark fix things, but the situation didn't improve. Lisa wasn't answering his calls or texts, and he was left spiraling deeper into a pit of regret. I tried to console him, but the guilt weighed heavily on me. I had given him advice, and it had destroyed his relationship. In the days that followed, I couldn't stop thinking about what had happened. It felt like everything I had said was wrong, like I had made things worse instead of better. I tried to remind myself that Mark was the one who had ultimately made the decision to confront Lisa, but it didn't feel like that mattered. He was my friend, and I had failed him. Then, one day, a few weeks after the breakup, I received a message from Mark that caught me completely off guard. "Hey, I need to talk to you," the text read. My stomach dropped. Was he going to blame me for everything again? Was he angry with me? I called him immediately, and this time, when he answered, his voice was lighter, almost relieved. "What's going on?" I asked, still bracing myself for the worst. "I know this sounds crazy, but I think I've figured it out," Mark said. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said, about putting myself first and being honest with what I need. I didn't realize it before, but maybe I've been holding on to something that wasn't meant to be. Lisa and I weren't right for each other, and maybe that's why we were always fighting. I think I needed to hear what you said to finally see it." My heart skipped a beat. "So, what does that mean?" "It means I'm okay. I'm going to be fine. I've started focusing on myself, on what I want. I don't want to get back with Lisa, and I think that's the best thing for both of us," Mark said. "I just wanted to say thanks, man. Your advice. It helped me see the truth." I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. For a moment, I was relieved, but then, the full scope of it hit me. The advice I had given had set off a chain of events that, at first, seemed catastrophic, but in the end, it had helped Mark come to terms with the reality of his relationship. It wasn't the way I had imagined it would go, but maybe, just maybe, it was what he needed to hear. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had almost ruined his life with a simple piece of advice. It had backfired spectacularly, just not in the way I had expected. I learned a valuable lesson that day. Sometimes, the right advice isn't about offering solutions, it's about giving someone the space to find their own. In the end, I guess I had played a part in his growth. But it will forever be a reminder that giving advice is a double-edged sword. A confession from my childhood that still haunts me. A confession from my childhood that still haunts me. I've never told anyone this before, but I feel like it's been eating me alive for years, like something dark and poisonous that I can't keep inside any longer. It all started one summer when I was around 12, back when my parents used to send me to stay with my aunt in this tiny, almost forgotten town a few hours from the city. My aunt's house was an old colonial on the edge of a dense forest, and though it was beautiful, there was something unsettling about it. As a kid, I didn't really understand what bad vibes meant, but that house had them. There was a coldness in some of the rooms, especially the basement. My cousin David was a few years older than me, and though we'd never been particularly close, that summer he was suddenly my only companion. David was strange, though. He would stare at things too long, didn't laugh at any of my jokes, and had a way of drifting into silence mid-conversation, like he was listening to something I couldn't hear. But I was 12, lonely, and eager to have any kind of connection, so I ignored all the red flags, chalked it up to him just being different. One afternoon, David asked if I wanted to go into the woods. There was supposed to be an abandoned cabin out there, somewhere deep among the trees, and he said he knew the way. The thing about the woods was they felt like a whole different world. As soon as we crossed the boundary from my aunt's yard, the temperature seemed to drop. The sounds of birds and bugs disappeared, leaving only an unnatural silence that made my skin crawl. But David was determined, and I followed, pretending not to notice the unease settling in my stomach. We walked for what felt like hours, deeper and deeper, until the trees became so dense that barely any sunlight made it through. That's when we saw it. The cabin was old and half-collapsed, covered in moss and vines, hidden so well that you could pass by it 100 times and never see it unless you knew exactly where to look. David told me he'd found it last summer and never told anyone, that it was our secret. He was grinning like he'd just shown me the best surprise of my life, but I remember feeling a cold, prickling fear. I didn't want to go inside, but David grabbed my arm and pulled me in before I could protest. The cabin was dark and smelled of rot, mold, and something else I couldn't quite place. It was filled with strange things, dried-up animal bones scattered on the floor, weird symbols scratched into the walls, and, in the center, a small wooden box sitting on a makeshift altar. I wanted to leave, but David insisted we stay. He told me that he'd found the box last year and that there was something inside it, something powerful, something he hadn't dared to touch yet but wanted to show me. He had this wild look in his eyes, something intense and almost feverish that scared me more than anything else. Then he opened the box. Inside was a tiny, shriveled hand, no bigger than a baby's, curled into a claw-like shape and covered in some kind of dark, dried liquid. The smell hit me first. It was rancid, like old meat left in the sun. David told me it was the hand of the forest spirit, something he'd read about in some old book in my aunt's library, something he said would protect us if we made a pact with it. I wanted to run, but David grabbed my hand and told me to swear on the hand, to promise I'd keep the secret, that I'd never tell anyone about the cabin or the hand or what we were about to do. He said if we didn't swear, the spirit would get angry, and we'd be cursed. At that age, curses felt as real as anything else, so I nodded, whispered the words he told me to say, and let him press my hand onto the shriveled, leathery surface of that thing. It felt wrong, cold and hard, and it left this weird sticky residue on my skin. We left the cabin after that, and for the rest of the summer, David barely spoke to me, acted like nothing happened. I tried to forget it too, but the memory clung to me, lurking in the back of my mind, making it hard to sleep. I remember my mom asking why I'd become so quiet and withdrawn, but how could I explain? When I got back home after summer ended, things started happening. At first, it was small stuff. I'd hear my name whispered when no one was there, see shadows moving out of the corner of my eye. I thought it was just my imagination, that I was being silly, letting my mind play tricks on me. But then the dreams started. In every one, I was back in the cabin, standing before that tiny shriveled hand, only now it was alive, twitching, reaching out for me, whispering my name in this horrible, raspy voice. It got so bad I was afraid to sleep, started seeing the hand in every shadow, hearing it call to me even when I was wide awake. Then, one night, I woke up to find a small, red handprint on my arm, like someone had pressed their fingers into my skin while I slept. I ran to my parents, hysterical, showed them the mark, but they just brushed it off as a bruise or something I'd done to myself in my sleep. No one believed me, and eventually, I stopped telling anyone, kept it all inside. Years went by, and I tried to convince myself it was just a nightmare, that none of it was real. But then last week, I got a call from my aunt. David had gone missing. She said he'd been acting strange, withdrawn, obsessed with something he refused to talk about. He'd been going into the woods every night, and then one night, he just didn't come back. They searched everywhere, but he was gone, vanished without a trace. That night, the dreams returned, only now, they were worse. I saw David in the cabin, standing before that altar, whispering to the hand, begging it for something. His face was twisted, desperate, terrified, and then he looked at me, reached out, and screamed for help. I woke up drenched in sweat, the sound of his voice still echoing in my head. Since then, the hauntings have become more intense. I'll catch glimpses of him in the mirror, his eyes hollow, pleading. I can hear the hand whispering in my dreams, telling me it's time, that I have to come back, that I have to finish what we started. I don't know what it wants from me, but I can feel it growing stronger, like it's getting closer every day. I'm terrified to go back to that town, to face whatever waits for me in the woods, but I know it's only a matter of time. Every night, I wake up with that same red handprint on my arm, fresh and raw, like a warning. I can feel it pulling me, calling me back to the cabin, to the hand, to the pact I made all those years ago. And the worst part is, deep down, I know I have to go back. Because if I don't, it's only a matter of time before it comes for me, before it drags me into the woods, just like it did with David. This is my confession, my curse, my childhood sin that still haunts me. I don't know what's waiting for me out there, but I can feel it watching, waiting for the day I finally come back to finish what I started, when a simple favor turned into a complicated mess. I never expected something so simple to spiral so out of control, but looking back, I should have known better. It all started when my friend Amy asked me for a small favor. She was in a tough spot, her car had broken down, and she needed a ride to an important meeting. Now, I knew she was always reliable, someone who had always helped me out when I needed it, so of course, I said yes. It was just a ride, after all. How could it turn into anything complicated? That was my first mistake, underestimating how much could go wrong when you step into someone else's world without fully understanding what's at stake. I agreed without thinking, picked her up at her place, and we were on our way. The drive was uneventful at first, just the usual chatter about life, work, the things we always talked about when we got together. But as we neared the destination, something felt off. Amy was being quieter than usual, glancing out the window, tapping her fingers nervously on the armrest. It was subtle, but I noticed it. "Are you okay?" I asked, trying to break the tension. She forced a smile. "Yeah, just a little stressed. Big meeting today." That wasn't unusual. Amy was always a little on edge before big presentations, but this time, it seemed different. She was acting like she was holding something back, like there was more going on than she was willing to let me in on. I didn't press her, though. I figured it was just the nerves. We pulled up to the building where her meeting was taking place. She thanked me and got out, but as she walked toward the entrance, she turned around. "Hey," she called, hesitating for a moment, "can you do me another favor while I'm in there?" "Of course, what's up?" I replied. "Can you just wait for me in the car? I'll be back in an hour. I don't want to be alone when I leave, okay? I really need you to be there." I was confused, but I agreed. I mean, it wasn't a big deal, right? Just sit in the car for a bit while she handled her business. But then things started to get strange. As I waited, I noticed people coming and going from the building. One man, in particular, caught my eye. He was walking toward the building, his phone pressed to his ear, but what stood out to me was how familiar he looked. I couldn't place him at first, but there was something about his demeanor that made me uneasy. Maybe it was the way he kept glancing at my car, or the fact that he was clearly agitated. I tried to shake it off, but I couldn't stop watching him. After a few minutes, he disappeared inside the building, and I went back to scrolling through my phone. But that was when things started getting worse. I heard a knock on my window. I jumped, startled, and looked up to see Amy standing there, her face pale, her eyes wide with fear. "Get in," she whispered urgently. "We have to go, now." I didn't ask any questions. I unlocked the door, and she got in quickly, slamming the door shut behind her. Her hands were shaking, and her breath was ragged. "What happened?" I asked, trying to stay calm. "Who was that guy?" "I don't want to talk about it right now," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Just drive." Something in her voice made it clear that whatever had happened was serious. I didn't push her further. I just started the car and pulled away from the building, glancing in the rearview mirror. That's when I saw him. The man I had noticed earlier was now following us, tailing us closely in his car. My heart started to race. "Amy, who is that?" I asked, my voice shaking. She didn't answer, her eyes fixed on the road ahead. The silence between us was deafening. As we turned down a side street, I tried to lose him, making sharp turns and speeding up, but the car behind us stayed right on our tail. "I don't know what to do," Amy muttered under her breath, her hands clutching the seat. "I didn't want you to get involved, but now I have no choice. He's going to hurt me if I don't get away." "What do you mean? Who is he?" I asked, my mind racing. "What's going on?" She finally turned to me, her eyes wide with terror. "He's not just some guy," she said, her voice trembling. "He's someone I used to be involved with. Someone I thought I got away from. But he found me. And now he's coming for me, and he's going to make sure I pay for what I did." I was speechless. What could I even say to that? How did I get myself into this? This simple favor had turned into a nightmare. I tried to stay calm, but the adrenaline was taking over. I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, and I could see his headlights getting closer. He was right behind us now. I was running out of options. "We have to get somewhere safe," I said, my voice tight with panic. "We can't outrun him. We need to hide." But Amy just shook her head. "He knows all the places I go. He'll find us no matter what we do. The only way out of this is to confront him." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Confront him? What was I supposed to do, fight a man who clearly wasn't afraid of anything? I didn't know what to do, but I couldn't just leave her. I couldn't abandon her in this mess. So I did what any decent person would do in that moment, I kept driving. We wound our way through the back streets, trying to lose him, but he was relentless. Finally, after what felt like hours, I spotted a police station up ahead. I pulled in quickly, hoping to get some kind of help. But as soon as I stopped the car, Amy froze. "What's wrong?" I asked, my voice panicked. "You need to get out of here." "Don't go inside," she said, almost pleading. "Why? What's going on?" I demanded. "Because they're not going to help you," she said, her eyes filling with tears. "I wasn't just trying to get away from him, I'm running from the law, too. I did something horrible. And if they find out, it's not just him I'll have to worry about. It's everyone. The words hit me like a ton of bricks. All this time, I had been trying to help her, trying to be a good friend, but I had no idea what I had walked into. This wasn't just about a guy chasing her, it was about her running from something much darker. Now, I was tangled up in a situation I didn't know how to escape. Amy wasn't who I thought she was. She wasn't just some friend asking for a favor. She was hiding something dangerous. Something that had turned my simple favor into a complicated mess. As I sat there, in front of that police station, not knowing what to do, I realized I was caught in a nightmare of her making, and there was no way out. Not for me, not for her. And now, I was in too deep. The only question left was, could I get out alive? My friend stole my baby name, now she wants me to change mine. I had always dreamed of having a daughter and naming her something special, something unique that held deep meaning. When my best friend Sarah and I first discussed baby names years ago, we both casually mentioned our favorites, and I revealed mine, Aveline, a name I had loved since childhood. It felt enchanting, a blend of beauty and strength, just like I hoped my future daughter would be. Fast forward a few years, and I found out I was pregnant. The news was exhilarating, and I couldn't wait to share it with everyone, especially Sarah. I called her immediately, ecstatic, telling her about my pregnancy and the name I had chosen. Sarah sounded genuinely happy for me, and we spent hours discussing baby preparations, my nursery ideas, and how we would support each other through motherhood. Then, just a few months later, I received a text from Sarah. She had just given birth to a beautiful baby girl. My heart soared for her, but when I saw the name she had chosen, my stomach dropped. It was Aveline. I couldn't believe it. I felt like my heart had been ripped out of my chest. I was devastated. How could she take my baby name? I had told her my choice in confidence, and now she had gone and used it for her own child. It felt like a betrayal, and I struggled to process my emotions. I was happy for Sarah but felt anger bubbling beneath the surface. How could she do this to me? When I confronted her about it, she laughed it off, insisting it was a coincidence. It's such a beautiful name, how could I resist? She said, brushing aside my hurt feelings. I tried to remain composed, but inside, I was seething. I couldn't let her get away with this. I spent nights crying into my pillow, wondering if I should still name my daughter Aveline or come up with something else entirely. A part of me felt like I should abandon the name to avoid conflict, but another part felt like I was giving in to Sarah's inconsideration. I eventually decided I would keep the name Aveline because it was special to me, regardless of her decision. The weeks passed, and my due date approached. I was excited yet nervous, thinking about how things would unfold with Sarah after my daughter was born. Would she resent me for keeping the name? Would it ruin our friendship? These thoughts haunted me, but I tried to focus on my pregnancy and preparing for the big day. Then, the day finally came. I gave birth to a healthy, beautiful baby girl, and when they handed her to me, I felt a rush of love I had never known before. As I held her, I whispered, "Welcome to the world, Aveline." Just a few hours later, Sarah arrived at the hospital, her baby in her arms, beaming with pride. The moment she saw my daughter's name on the board, her smile faltered. "Oh, so you really went with Aveline?" she said, her tone a mix of surprise and disapproval. "I thought we could talk about this before you decided." I felt my heart race. "Talk about what?" "I've been telling you since I was pregnant that Aveline was my choice," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. She rolled her eyes. "But you know I wanted to keep the name for my daughter. I thought we could share it." "Share it? You can't just take a name and expect me to give it up because you used it first," I snapped, feeling the anger boiling over. Sarah's eyes narrowed, and I could see the tension building between us. "It's not fair to me. Why can't you just change your mind?" "It's not too late," she demanded, and I couldn't believe what I was hearing. How could she have the audacity to ask me to change my daughter's name after she had taken it from me? "You can't be serious right now," I said, my voice trembling with disbelief. "You took my name. You can't just decide I should change it to make you comfortable." She huffed and crossed her arms, refusing to back down. "It'll just cause drama between our families if we both have daughters with the same name. Think about it." I shook my head, feeling the tears prick at my eyes. "I can't believe you would ask me to do this. Aveline is my baby's name, and I'm not changing it for you." She scoffed, "You're being selfish. This isn't just about you, it's about our friendship. My heart sank. This wasn't about friendship, it was about Sarah's desire to feel like she had the right to dictate my choices. I turned away from her, shaking with anger and frustration. "Get out," I said, my voice firm. "You need to leave." She paused, looking hurt, and for a moment, I felt guilty. But that guilt was quickly overshadowed by my resolve. I wasn't going to let her walk all over me anymore. After that day, things got tense. I returned home with Aveline, and Sarah sent me countless texts, pleading with me to reconsider, to be reasonable. I ignored her. I was too hurt to engage. My daughter was my priority, and I needed to focus on her, not Sarah's drama. Days turned into weeks, and I settled into motherhood. But the tension with Sarah lingered like a storm cloud overhead. I kept my distance, choosing not to engage with her on social media or answer her texts. The drama escalated when she decided to throw a birthday party for her daughter. I was hesitant to attend, but I knew I needed to be civil, for the sake of our friendship. When I arrived, the atmosphere was charged with unspoken tension. Sarah greeted me with a forced smile, but I could feel the animosity simmering beneath the surface. As the party progressed, I watched as she introduced her daughter, who was also named Aveline, to the guests, and the awkwardness was palpable. Guests were confused and whispered among themselves about the shared name, and I felt my heart pound in my chest. I was furious. Later in the day, while the kids played, I overheard Sarah talking to another friend. "I can't believe she didn't change the name. It's so inconsiderate," she said, and I felt my blood boil. I couldn't let this go on. I approached her, my heart racing. "You need to stop talking about me behind my back, Sarah. If you have a problem with my choice, say it to my face," I said, my voice steady despite my nerves. Her eyes widened, surprise flashing across her face. "I wasn't talking about you," she exclaimed, but I could see the guilt in her expression. "You have no right to demand I change my daughter's name after you took it from me," I continued, my voice rising. "You are ruining our friendship over something that should be a joyful occasion." "It's just a name," she shouted back, and I felt a wave of disbelief wash over me. "It's not just a name. It's my daughter's identity. You can't just dismiss that." "You're being dramatic," she said dismissively, but I could see the cracks forming in her facade. The guests around us had gone quiet, sensing the growing tension. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to remain calm. "You have to understand, this isn't just about names. It's about respect. I respected your choice to name your child, but you didn't respect mine. And that hurts more than anything," I said, my voice softening. Her expression shifted, and I could see the realization hitting her. "I didn't mean to hurt you. I thought we could share it. I didn't think it would come to this," she admitted, her voice trembling. I could feel the anger dissipating as I looked at her, my best friend who had turned into a rival overnight. "I want us to be okay, but I can't compromise on this. Aveline is my daughter, and I want her to feel proud of her name," I replied, my heart aching at the distance that had grown between us. Sarah took a step back, her eyes downcast. "I'm sorry. I didn't think it through," she murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. "I know I messed up." It felt like a small victory, but it was a step toward healing. "I think we need some space to figure this out," I suggested, my voice calm. "I hope you can understand that." She nodded, tears glistening in her eyes. "I do. I'm sorry." As the party continued, the atmosphere began to shift. I saw Sarah interacting with other guests, but the tension was still there, lingering in the air. Over the following weeks, I focused on Aveline and healing from the hurt of our friendship. Sarah sent me messages, trying to reach out and apologize, but I felt it was best to take time apart. Then, one day, I received a letter in the mail from her. It was heartfelt, filled with apologies and an understanding of the pain she caused. She expressed her wish to meet and talk things through, and I felt a glimmer of hope. We agreed to meet at a local park, our favorite spot. As I approached, I saw her sitting on a bench, looking anxious. I took a seat beside her, and we both sighed simultaneously. "I've missed you," she said softly, and I felt a wave of nostalgia wash over me. "I've missed us too," I replied, my heart ached for the friendship we once had. We spent hours talking, opening up about our feelings and the
Thanksgiving has always been my favorite holiday. A time when the clamor of the family brings laughter and warmth beneath the same roof, but this year felt different. My brother, Kyle, pranced around like a kid with a new toy, bursting with excitement about bringing his girlfriend, Clara, to our annual gathering. You see, last summer, Clara had delighted in ruffling feathers at our last family get-together, rolling her eyes at my wife's carefully prepared dishes, making snarky remarks about how basic we all are, and I tried to shake it off because I wanted Kyle to be happy, but disrespecting my wife crossed a line I wasn't willing to ignore. So, when he casually brought it up, I told him he wasn't welcome to bring her, but he insisted, claiming it was a family holiday. That's when I lost it. I told him to never speak to me about Clara again after the way she treated Lisa. The argument escalated. Kyle called me the jerk for trying to dictate who he could be with, and I saw red because he was treating her like some kind of trophy, oblivious to her previous barbs that had been named right at my wife's heart. The day of Thanksgiving arrived, and as I set the table with all the traditional trimmings, I felt my heart race. I imagined what it would be like to see Kyle arrive with Clara in tow, her smug expressions and backhanded comments ready to slice through the delicate fabric of our family's gratefulness. I trembled in anticipation of conflict, but a part of me held fast to my conviction. I didn't want to give her another chance to drag us down. Kyle showed up alone, his face twisted in confusion at my prohibition, and asked where Clara was. I couldn't mask my relief, yet it was tinged with guilt. His disappointed gaze was like nails scraping down a chalkboard, and instead of joy, the dinner felt somber, empty. We made small talk, but he kept checking his phone, waiting for messages I knew would never come. But then, halfway through the turkey, my phone buzzed, and my heart sank. Kyle had texted me a photo of Clara standing outside our house, arms crossed, pouting. The pure, unsettling sensation of dread crept up my spine. I couldn't help but dreadfully think about how she might manipulate him to guilt-trip me into allowing her in, how she thrived on chaos and loved to provoke a scene. My mind raced as I imagined her knocking and leaving rude comments, but I couldn't bring myself to confront it directly. I pretended not to see. But the doorbell rang just as the flaky pumpkin pie was set to be served. My pulse quickened, and Kyle shot up as if on a spring, darting toward the door. Opening it, there she was, unapologetic and grinning, smelling of cinnamon that blended with the pungent aroma of winter that sneaked in behind her. Suddenly, I could feel everyone's eyes on me, their questions hanging in the air, thickening the atmosphere. The tension pulled like a rubber band stretched too far. All of my fears were manifesting before me. Kyle's face paled, caught between refusing to abide by my wishes and the desire to please his girlfriend, and he turned to me in desperation. "Come on, man. This is Thanksgiving," he pleaded, trying to soften my heart with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. I shot him a glare, but before I could respond, Clara barged in, her voice dripping with mock sincerity as she greeted everyone with a hollow cheer that felt like nails on a chalkboard. My wife, who had been graciously handling the dinners, flinched as Clara sashayed past her, snickering about the lack of class. My heart thudded in my chest, but I was paralyzed by rage and humiliation. I immediately voiced a challenge. The Thanksgiving holiday might be about family, but it wasn't about being disrespected in your home. As I tried to step outside for air, she followed me, letting loose a deluge of insults and accusations, belittling my position while Kyle stood helplessly in the doorway, caught between me and her. I realized in that moment that professional insults flew between us like arrows, and every crack in my sanity widened. I had spent so many hours putting this day together, only for Clara to turn it into a battlefield. My wife emerged from the tentacles of the kitchen, her eyes filled with disbelief, a silent plea for me to stop. But I couldn't. Clara's laughter echoed through my bones when I told her she needed to leave my home. I remember her surprise like it was yesterday, sneering at me as if some sick thrill was coursing through her veins. That's when I saw the fear in Kyle's eyes, and something in me snapped. The thought of losing him crushed me, and I was ready for whatever wreckage finished me off. But Kyle surprised me by taking Clara by the arm, forcibly pulling her toward the exit. The door slamming shut behind them echoed like a gavel. Silence returned to our home, and suddenly, I felt hollow inside, regret crashing over me like waves gnawing away at the edges of my happiness. Was I right to have refused her? Everything fell silent afterwards, no laughter, no clinking of forks, only stares exchanged, caught in a collision of unsure support and tension. Hours later, as the last plate was washed and the family scattered into the night, Kyle texted me, a single sentence that sliced deeper than any knife: "You've lost Clara and me." And a part of me thought, was all this chaos really worth it? I signed up for a trial subscription, But I can't cancel it, at least that's what the email said when I clicked through to their site, lured in by the promise of exclusive content, the kind of content that would make me feel less alone in my mundane life. The offer seemed harmless enough, a month of curated stories, art, and encounters that would transport me from my dreary existence in a small town to whatever fantastical escapade their team had conjured up. Initially, I spent hours basking in the allure of it all, diving into each story as if unearthing hidden treasures that had long been buried beneath my boredom. But then the emails started flooding in, first, just a couple of reminders about my trial ending, but shortly after that, a more insistent tone crept in, a kind of almost desperate urgency in their promotions. Don't miss out. Your selected stories are waiting. One of them screamed at me, coupled with an aggressive countdown clock ticking ominously at the top. It started as a nuisance, subtly nudging me to upgrade, but soon even the content I adored turned unsettling. Strange images that gave me a sense of déjà vu lined the sidebar, whispering secrets of a world that felt too familiar. I brushed it off, hoping the glowing glow of the screen would drown out the unease growing within me like an ominous cloud. But then disaster struck, my trial ended, and, when I tried to cancel it, I was met with an error screen, the word cancel highlighted in a sickly green hue, mocking my desperation. A chill shot through me when I replayed my attempts and received a response that felt eerily scripted. You cannot cancel your subscription at this time. Please contact support. I tried, I truly did. Every avenue I ventured into led me back to the same error message. Days went by, and each response from so-called support was just a robotic, recycled text telling me my case was being reviewed. There was no real person, only an endless loop. They didn't even need a real human to provide better service. I found my mind spiraling as sleepless nights blurred into haunting days, my spirit sucked dry by the relentless cycle of attempts and failures. I couldn't focus on work, couldn't enjoy meals, couldn't even crawl into bed without a palpable sense of dread nestling in my bones, yet I feared that if I let the matter be, something sinister would happen. I began to receive weirder content crafted for people in perpetual states of despair, stories tinged with filaments of truth that echoed my thoughts and feelings too perfectly. There was one about a man who found himself trapped inside his own home when he could no longer cancel a cursed subscription service. The walls began to cave in as he realized the outside world had slipped beyond his reach, replaced with harrowing versions of his friends and loved ones, their faces warped from gentle to grotesque whenever he spotted them through the window. But maybe it was just fiction, that tiny shred of hope I clung to until last night when I woke up hearing the familiar ping of an email arriving. My heart raced, pounding in my ears as I stumbled to my computer, praying for something, anything that hinted at resolution. Instead, I found a single sentence: "We've extended your subscription indefinitely." I trembled at the implications, my fingers shaking as I tried to type yet another cancellation at the keyboard, desperation clawing at my throat. As I pressed send, I noticed an unsettling reflection in the darkened screen behind me, shadows warped into shapes I couldn't quite comprehend. A chill ran down my spine. I felt as though something was watching me, latching onto the corners of my perception. My frantic clicks continued a symphony of failure until I caught sight of a chilling email titled, "Your ultimate fate awaits." It felt wrong, a stillness enveloped me, the air thickening as I hesitated, then clicked in a trance-like state. Once the message opened, I was greeted with a video link. Hesitant yet compelled, I clicked, my stomach twisting in knots. The image that unfolded on screen made me gasp. It was a video of me, sitting at my desk, deadpan and emotionless, just as I was now. The background morphed into snapshots of my life, my friends and family, distorted and cruel, with unsettling grins plastered on their faces as if they were laughing at me. I wanted to look away, but I couldn't. I was somehow trapped in that fleeting moment, helplessly watching myself be consumed by shadows swirling around my own reflection. The screen flashed ominously to reveal words that felt like knives slicing through my reality: unlock your fate. Or lose yourself entirely. Panic set in as the room around me darkened, the corners melting into the shadows behind me. My heart raced faster as the laughter grew louder in my ears, echoing like a haunting lullaby. I could feel the strange fascination grow, how the fear wrestled with my curiosity. Every failed attempt to free myself only bound me tighter to this twisted service, this unseen puppeteer pulling my strings. I had no choice but to follow. In one final act of defiance, I clicked to respond, every ounce of my will bending towards refusing. I sat staring at the screen, the email box lingering tauntingly open, but no matter how hard I tried to type "I want to cancel," my fingers disobeyed, tapping out the words that twisted into their own dark invitation. Please show me what happens next. And that, dear reader, is how I signed up for a trial subscription I couldn't cancel, spiraling into a world where my every attempt to find the exit only solidified my entrance into a nightmare that now eclipsed reality. I'm trapped, searching for a way out while the darkness envelops my mind, an endless cycle where I'm the puppet, and the service is the puppeteer. And if you're reading this, well, good luck finding the unsubscribe link before it's too late.
When I was younger, I lived in a small, isolated town that felt like a fairy tale, idyllic, charming, but ultimately stifling. Everyone knew everyone else's business. My parents owned the corner bakery, a quaint little place that smelled of fresh bread and pastries, and I grew up surrounded by those warm scents, kneading dough at my mother's side. Yet, in the midst of that comfort, there was always a shadow lurking in the background. Not an actual shadow, mind you, but the kind that lives in your mind. At 14, my world shattered. My older sister, Lily, was everything I wasn't: brave, adventurous, and beloved. She was adored in our town for her stunning voice. She was always on stage, singing at school events and local festivals, destined for something greater. One evening, a tragic car accident took her from us. I remember the way the sky turned a bruised purple that night, just before the news broke. My world flipped upside down. I lost not just my sister but every ounce of joy in my life. Everyone walked around my house in solemn silence, whispering about the tragedy that had befallen us, and I felt like I was trapped in a web of grief. Days blurred into weeks, and the little pieces of cheer that had once filled our bakery crumbled into sadness. I started living only for the days when I could close my eyes and dream of days gone by, when laughter echoed through our home, instead of just empty silence. I sought solace in deep memories, holding on fiercely to Lily's old belongings, her albums. Her clothes still hung in the closet, the last voicemail she left saved on my phone. Looking back now, it wasn't healthy, it was suffocating. I slipped into an almost insurmountable depression, refusing to let anyone see the depth of my grief. I pushed away my friends, becoming a ghost wandering the halls of high school, haunted by memories of a sister I could never bring back. But then, it happened, the moment that shifted everything. I was alone at home one night, the quiet pressing down on me like a weight. I'd just finished preparing orders for the bakery, a chore I'd taken over since the accident, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I decided to sort through some of Lily's things. Her bedroom had remained untouched, almost like a shrine, and as I opened her closet, a wave of nostalgia rushed over me. I found her old notebook tucked away in a dark corner, pages yellowed but bursting with beautiful handwriting. It was filled with song lyrics, poems, and dreams she'd envisioned, the tales she wanted to tell, the adventures she yearned to embark upon. As I flipped through the pages, a sense of anger welled up within me. Why had she been taken? Why didn't I deserve those dreams? I slammed the notebook shut and threw it across the room, sobbing uncontrollably. In that moment, something snapped within me, an unfamiliar rage directed at my own inaction, my own cowardice at letting the past dictate my future. Later that night, while still swirling in tears, something peculiar happened. I heard a whisper, soft and soothing, almost like a breeze grazing my ear. It was then that I realized something pivotal: I couldn't continue like this. I had to let go. Lily wouldn't want me to be consumed by sorrow. Holding my breath, I picked up the notebook again, tears still stinging my eyes but now more contemplative. I opened it once more, and the rage transformed into something profound, something almost cleansing. For the rest of the night, I pored over those pages, imagining I was hearing Lily's voice, urging me to live, to write my own story. After a few days, I began to try and replicate those lyrics, to put my grief into song. It was a catharsis I never expected. Awkward at first, every line felt heavy, an anchor binding me to my despair. But slowly, with each syllable, I began to weave a tapestry of not just loss but love. I could hear Lily in my head, encouraging me, pushing me to take that leap. I took her old guitar, dusty and neglected, and plucked the strings cautiously, letting melodies flit through the air like butterflies. Days turned into weeks, and before I knew it, I was spilling everything into my own notebook. I started performing my songs in secret, at open mic nights on the outskirts of town, cloaked in anonymity. As I drew acclaim from strangers, I felt Lily's spirit wrapped around me, a warm embrace nudging me forward. Through this journey, I realized I needed to transcend my grief, not by forgetting Lily but by honoring her memory. Eventually, after countless nights of practice, I took to the local stage of a small local coffee shop, a venue renowned for showcasing raw talent. Nervous energy coursed through my veins, but as I strummed the first chord, courage enveloped me. I channeled my heartbreak, my loss, and engineered it into beautiful songs, a tribute to my sister. The applause that erupted afterward was intoxicating. It felt like a warm hug, but more importantly, I could feel the ghost of my past fading away, as if Lily was standing there proudly, smiling down at me. With each performance, I began to shed layers of grief, learning the beauty of letting go. Instead of dwelling in silent shadows, I was finally basking in the light of my memories, writing new ones, still intertwined with Lily. It's been years since that pivotal night, but the revelation remains fresh in my mind. I learned that the past shapes us, but it doesn't define us. We can create new meaning from sorrow, breathe life into faded dreams, and through everything, emerge stronger. The day I let go of the past was not about erasing Lily from my heart but embracing her spirit in everything I do. In that, I found freedom. Life continues, unpredictable yet beautiful, filled with the weight of memories, but now, I carry them lightly, like a feather on the wind. I want to share with you an experience that changed my life forever, one I hesitated to relive until the need to tell someone became overwhelming. It began innocently enough, a week off from work, and my friends had cancelled on me last minute. Instead of wallowing in disappointment, I decided to go on a trip alone. Initially, I felt nervous. Traveling solo through uncharted territories was not something I had ever envisioned. So, I packed a small backpack, tossed in a couple of changes of clothes, and set out to the quaint coastal town of Greyhaven. The plan was to spend a few days at a charming little inn, exploring the town, enjoying the scenery, and perhaps finding some comfort in solitude. My arrival at Greyhaven was enveloped in a silence I had never experienced, the ocean breeze whispering gentle secrets as I stepped off the bus. I checked into the inn, a creaky wooden building filled with a sense of history. The innkeeper, a sweet elderly woman named Agnes, greeted me with a warm smile, her hands weathered yet gentle as she handed me the keys to my room. It was a small, cozy space with a window overlooking the ocean, its gentle waves rolling onto the sandy shore. I immediately felt the burden of my recent weeks gradually lifting, the chaos of my life replaced by an unexpected peace. After settling in, I decided to venture out and see what the town had to offer. As I walked through the cobbled streets, I was entranced by the warmth of the locals. They smiled and nodded as I passed, making me feel like I was stepping into a warm embrace. There was a vibrant art shop, a quaint cafe filled with the aroma of freshly baked pastries, and small vendors selling handmade trinkets. Hours slipped away as I wandered, each moment a celebration of solitude. Dinner was a delightful affair. I chose a little seafood joint tucked away from the bustling streets. I sat alone at the bar, savoring every bite of the lobster ravioli as the sun set, painting the sky in hues of orange and lavender. It was serene, just me and the luscious food. I returned to my inn, an airy buzz scuttling through my heart. The feeling was intoxicating. That night, however, things took a strange turn. As I was drifting off to sleep, I heard the distinct sound of whispering. It was faint at first, like a breeze rustling through leaves. Confused, I shook it off as the wind outside playing tricks on my ears and fell deeper into a restful slumber. The next day, I woke up early to watch the sunrise, a colossal amber ball rising over the horizon, fragments of light dancing upon the water. The beauty of it all pulled me in like gravity. I had never felt so connected to a moment before. Nevertheless, the whispering returned that night, louder this time, clearer. Fragments of words wafted through the air, barely audible yet tangible enough to send shivers down my spine. Curiosity gnawed at me, compelling me to seek the source. My gut told me to keep quiet, to ignore it, but the mystery of it churned in my mind. On my third day, I discovered a small hidden path leading down to an isolated beach, only accessible during low tide. It was secluded, the support of the cliffs creating an almost sacred atmosphere. I found myself drawn deeper into this world, where the sea met the rocks, and the whispers became waves of sound echoing through my mind. I wandered back to the inn, the whispers still ringing. It felt as if there was something waiting for me, calling my name from within the shadows. As evening fell, I steeled myself against the growing chill and went back to the beach. The moon was full, casting eerie silver beams across the water, illuminating the beach like a stage in a ghostly play. The whispers grew louder, now almost like a chorus. There, standing at the water's edge, was a figure, a silhouette watching the waves. The figure was draped in flowing white, blending seamlessly with the soft froth of the crashing ocean. I couldn't move. I was frozen, caught between the impulse to flee and the desire to understand the enigma before me. Gathering my courage, I called out, and the figure turned. Her face was ethereal, a haunting beauty illuminated by the celestial glow, and with her eyes, she beckoned me closer. An inexplicable bond seemed to form, an understanding transcending words. She opened her mouth, and the sweet sound of laughter danced through the air, coaxing me to step closer. In that moment, I felt a rush of emotions, elation, fear, and an uncanny sense of familiarity. I approached cautiously and realized she wore a necklace of sea stones, each one glinting with the soft shimmer of moonlight. She reached out, and suddenly, the whispers morphed into a gentle hum, wrapping around us like a warm blanket. "You've come searching for something," she said, her voice melodic yet firm. "You were meant to find it here." I didn't understand, but a part of me knew she was right. Alone with her on that mystical beach, I felt happier than I'd ever felt before. And just as suddenly, she stepped back, melting into the shadows, her laughter echoing in the wind. That night, I lay awake, the events swirling in my mind. The next morning dawned bright and clear, yet she was gone, leaving behind mere memories. With that vanishing act came a realization: the joy of traveling alone lay in the authenticity of my solitude, the ability to confront my deepest fears and embrace the unknown. It was the beginning of a journey within myself. I returned to city life after a week in Greyhaven, an invigorated version of myself. The whispers became invitations, the solitude became a friend. I learned to wander parts of my existence that were untouched, allowing me to connect with my truest self. Traveling alone taught me that the most profound journeys don't always lead to new destinations. Instead, they often remind us of the vastness within. Every trip I take now is marked by the lessons learned during that magical week. So, if you're reading this, and feeling hesitant about a solo adventure, let me tell you, don't think twice. Step into the unknown, embrace the silence, for it is there you might just discover who you truly are.
My husband, Tom, has always had a soft heart for lost things. He brought home a dog from a shelter once that turned out to be the sweetest creature, so when he told me he found a stray cat near the supermarket, I didn't think much of it at first. I remember that it was a rainy Thursday, the kind of day that turns the sidewalk slick and shiny, and as he opened the door, I caught sight of the damp little creature nestled in his coat, blinking its bright green eyes at me with an unsettling calmness. "I couldn't just leave it," he said, and I sighed, knowing how stubborn he could be. The cat, which we later named Felix, was small, dirty, and looked like it belonged to the world's worst kind of horror story, yet I couldn't help but feel a tinge of sympathy. As I watched him settle into our home, I noticed that he seemed awkwardly aware, listening intently to the sounds around him, and often staring into the corners as though he expected something there. The first time it happened was 2 nights after he arrived. I woke up to a peculiar noise coming from the living room. As I tiptoed out of bed, I could hear Tom speaking softly, and as I crept closer, my heart sank when I realized he was talking to the cat. "I know you can hear me, Felix," he said in a low voice. "You can't keep hiding it. Just tell me where you came from." Stunned, I peeked around the corner, and there was Felix, perched on the arm of the couch, staring directly at Tom with an intensity that sent chills down my spine. When Tom noticed me, his expression was one of surprise mixed with something darker, something almost desperate. I couldn't shake the feeling that they were sharing a secret that I wasn't part of. Days turned into weeks, and the strange occurrences only multiplied. Last week, Felix brought home a small, mutilated bird, leaving it on our doorstep like some grotesque trophy. Tom reacted oddly, kneeling beside it with a strange reverence, whispering, "I didn't want it to come to this, but you're ready now." My heart raced, and I quickly found solace in the mundane, convincing myself it was just a cat being a cat. But then, the dreams started, horrific flashbacks to moments from my childhood that I thought I had forgotten. In one of those vivid nightmares, I saw a dark figure standing beside my bed, whispering terrible things that left me paralyzed in fear. I woke up drenched in sweat. I had not considered the possibility that Felix might be conjuring these horrors, that he might be unknowingly reaching into my past and dragging it into the present. When I brought it up to Tom, he merely chuckled and waved it off, but I saw the way he looked at Felix, a mixture of affection and something unnameable. Frustrated, I took the matter into my own hands and began researching the lore surrounding black cats, Folklore swirled around them, suggesting they were often seen as omens or guardians, and some legends even spoke of them possessing supernatural knowledge, able to connect with realms beyond our understanding. The more I learned, the more I felt an unsettling sense of doom creeping into our lives. It wasn't until 2 days ago, while I was cleaning the attic, that I discovered an old box belonging to my grandmother, filled with trinkets, faded photographs, and my mother's journal. As I flipped through the pages, a name shot out at me, Martha. My heart stopped. I remembered her, a distant relative whom my mother had warned me about, claiming she dabbled in dark magic and was cursed for it. The moment I uttered Martha's name aloud, I heard Felix's soft purring echoing in the attic, vibrating more deeply than I had ever known. I rushed downstairs, desperate to confront Tom, who was once again lurking with Felix in our living room. "Do you know something about Martha?" I asked, barely able to contain my trembling voice. Tom's face blanched, the warmth fading from his eyes as he glanced at Felix, who appeared to be somehow judging the air between us, both calm and ready. "Martha's spirit is here in this house," Tom finally admitted, his voice grave. "I heard it from Felix, he knows all about your family." I felt a cold sweat beat on my back as the memories of myriad stories from my childhood surfaced, of strange incidents in our family, whispered warnings my mother had passed down. None of it ever made sense until now. "What does it want?" My voice trembled as I whispered, terrified of the answer I might receive. "Protection," Tom said, staring at the cat, unblinking. "It's drawn to you, to your blood. It wants revenge for the wrongs done to her by your family." That night, I barely slept, my mind racing with scenarios that I couldn't control. Felix lay at the foot of my bed, watching me with those piercing green eyes, not an ordinary cat but something wrapped in shadows and secrets. I knew he could sense my fear, feeding off it like a parasite while weaving spells that danced on the edge of my consciousness. When the clock struck 3, I woke to the sensation of being watched. Felix was perched on my chest, his weight heavy, his eyes glowing in the dark room like twin emerald beacons. "Help me," he seemed to say without words, and before I could catch my breath, everything around me twisted into colors and shadows, morphing into a realm that was not quite real. The air thickened, and I could feel a cold wind blow through the walls. Suddenly, I was no longer in my room. I stood on the threshold of a forgotten place, a swirling mist surrounding me, whispering ancient curses as if calling forth the spirits of my ancestors. At the center of it all loomed a figure, obscured by shadows yet somehow familiar. "You shouldn't have come here," the voice reverberated, ethereal and piercing. I felt every ounce of horror hit me as that voice echoed the warnings my mother used to hum, staunch and fierce in protecting me. And then, in a moment so horrifying that it would be burned into my memory, I realized the figure was Felix, or rather, the thing he had been hiding. "This is my time to claim what is due," it rasped, a chilling smile forming across its feline face, as the shadows closed in around me. No longer the cute, lost cat, Felix was a sentinel of something darker as he revealed my family's secret sins through my own eyes, watching as I trembled in the cold grip of judgment. And I understood then that Tom had been right all along. Felix knew things he shouldn't, and now I was bound to learn every last terrible truth.
I used to think that embracing flaws was like telling myself it was okay to fail, to be mediocre, to forgive every misstep I'd made in my life. Honestly, the concept made me sick to my stomach. Flaws were ugly little stains on the otherwise immaculate fabric of my existence, and I spent every waking hour trying to scrub them away. I was a perfectionist by every definition, meticulous, organized, set on feeding the insatiable beast of accomplishment that seemed to dictate my worth. But then, last summer, everything changed. That was when my life spiraled into something unexpected, something terrifying but strangely enlightening. I was home alone one night, plunging into a deep dive of anxiety that wrapped around me like a vice. I had just received the results of an important job interview, a position I thought I deserved. I logged onto my email, heart racing, hormones pulsing through my veins like electricity, ready to see the words "Congratulations" or "We regret to inform you." Instead, all I saw was the dreaded "Thank you for your interest," which hit me like a train. There I was, nearly 28 years old, an overachieving mess, and I couldn't keep it together for one lousy round of interviews. My mind was a battleground of self-loathing, and I felt like I was spiraling down some dark tunnel, consumed by my thoughts, weighing my worth against every person I'd ever come into contact with. In that bleak hour of despair, something strange happened. I watched the old, dusty television I rarely turned on. It flickered to life, a movie from my childhood playing, the incredibly campy horror flick Gore, Guts, and Glory. Ironically, despite its ridiculous plot and awful acting, it had been one of my favorites growing up. Suddenly, I was cast back in time. I was that innocent kid again, laughing loudly with friends who embraced their awkwardness, the way I had once done. The image of my carefree self cracked open something within me, and before I knew it, I was scrolling through old photos, memories flooding my system. I stumbled upon a picture of myself at the beach in a vibrant, mismatched bikini, at least 15 pounds heavier than I am now, sunburnt and grinning from ear to ear, clutching a watermelon like it was my prized possession. The smile on my face was wonderful, an overwhelming burst of joy, of flaws embraced. It hit me then. That moment had been pure and untainted. That was someone who didn't know perfection and didn't care, who relished in the sun's rays and her friends' laughter. I wanted that back. I wanted to feel that freedom again. So, I did something weird. I plunged into the most outrageous journey of self-discovery I could think of. I started going to wrestling classes. Yes, wrestling, tiny town amateur wrestling where I would put myself out there, physically and emotionally. The first day, I walked in trembling, clutching my water bottle like a safety blanket, surrounded by these hulking individuals, people who seemed to know their bodies, their roles, and their ultimate powers. My heart raced as I reluctantly joined the class, but instead of being judged, I was met with warmth and encouragement. I fell spectacularly during my first match, some guy easily tossing me aside. Laughter filled the air, my face burned a deep crimson, but the sound was euphoric. Instead of shame washing over me, I found I couldn't stop laughing either. They cheered me on, not for my skill, but for my audacity to even try. I signed up for each subsequent class, threw myself into wrestling, and began to embrace the discomfort of failure. Each tumble, each fall led to more laughter, more ridiculous moments shared. The bonds I formed with strangers transformed into friendships, scrapes and bruises became symbols of pride, the wrestlers embracing their own flaws, their unique quirks, everything that made them strange and marvelous. I also began to realize how oddly beautiful it was to share these experiences. After several weeks of training, I was invited to join an exhibition event, a night filled with mismatched styles, eccentric characters, and theatrical personas. I was terrified, yet thrilled, to be part of an authentic wrestling experience. As the lights dimmed and a fog rolled over the ring, I stepped inside adorned with a costume I had crafted, ridiculously nonsensical, an homage to the childhood dream I had long neglected. The crowd roared as I went up against competitors who fought with tenacity, who delved into theatrical storytelling while embracing every flaw they had. I was greeted with whoops and hollers, immersed in fluidity, becoming part of something larger than myself, transcending the confines of judgment I had placed upon myself all those years. Whether in sport or in social life, I began to realize that confidence was not built on perfection but constructed from shared flaws, from small triumphs in the face of imperfection. I learned to wear my flaws as a badge of honor and a testament to the incredible resilience that emerged from finally letting go, from accepting what I could not change, my heavy laugh, my stumbling walk, every time I mispronounced a word. I learned how to share openly about my insecurities, watching others beam with relief as we unveiled our true selves one conversation at a time. I've since formed meaningful relationships. Their distortions in life, glitches, imperfections woven into a narrative uniquely theirs, were now things I sought out, cherished, and celebrated. I forged new friendships solidified by a collective understanding that being human meant embracing flaws rather than detesting them. It's been a journey that led to newfound joy. The wrestling, its absurdity and beauty, taught me to cherish flaws. Now, 35 pounds lighter but more importantly, enveloped with love for every little quirk that once made me feel isolated, I stand firm, my heart lighter than it had ever been. No longer do I feel inadequate. Each time I face a setback, I hear the laughter of my wrestling friends, a reminder that in flaws lies freedom, sculpting a life stitched together with threads of imperfection and laughter. It's a wild ride, embracing these flaws, but it is a ride well worth the taking. So here's my plea to you, join me. Let go of that oppressive notion of perfection, embrace your flaws, love the chaos, and laugh with abandon. Life is too short for anything less. I live in a small town, the kind that feels like it's stuck in a time capsule. The sort of place where everyone knows each other, and we like it that way. Every year, we organize a community event, the Harvest Festival. It's meant to celebrate the season, promote local businesses, and bring the community together, but this year felt different. There was an unsettling vibe that lingered as we began to plan. I had volunteered to help wrangle the logistics, thinking it would be a great opportunity to bond with neighbors and share ideas. Little did I know, what started as a simple organizing task would spiral into a terrifying experience that I still can't shake off. The first few meetings were typical, people tossing around ideas, kids' activities, local music, and food vendors. We all gathered in the town hall, an old brick building that always felt like it was whispering secrets from the past. It wasn't until the third meeting that I noticed her, an elderly woman sitting in the back, her face hidden under a wide-brimmed hat and a thick shawl. She never spoke, just stared, and long after the meetings ended, she lingered outside as others left, her eyes boring into us like she was watching something we couldn't see. At first, I dismissed her presence as the quirks of our small town, but my gut told me something was off. I decided to find out who she was. Speaking to a few of the old-timers in town, I learned her name was Agnes. No one mentioned her too often, it would drift faintly in the air when someone recounted how she'd been a local herbalist before abruptly disappearing years ago. I couldn't shake the feeling that she had some connection to our festival. One night, I found myself restless, sprawled on my couch, the faint glow of my laptop illuminating the room. An obsession grasped me as I delved into Agnes's past. I stumbled across old newspaper clippings, stories about strange occurrences at past harvest festivals. Townsfolk spoke of her in the most peculiar ways, alluding to curses and dark rituals. Was she somehow linked to the festival? I put the pieces together in a manner that felt nonsensical. Perhaps it was just a small-town legend blown out of proportion. As the event date pushed closer, the tasks piled. It was during one of those late nights spent preparing that I received a phone call from the committee chair, urging a last-minute meeting. The atmosphere grew increasingly charged. The discussions turned frantic, many expressed worries that this festival would be like those of the past, haunted by misfortunes. I shared what I found about Agnes, half expecting laughter but receiving tight-lipped stares. They spoke in hushed tones, and a wave of unease washed over the room. With every passing day, I felt the presence of Agnes grow. I saw her often, always lurking at the edges of town, her eyes shadowed under that broad-brimmed hat. One evening, driven by a mix of dread and curiosity, I decided to confront her. Surprisingly, she welcomed me among her herbs and curious knickknacks, her small cottage an explosion of dust and color. I asked about the festival and its history, feeling foolish as I recounted the town's suspicions. To my shock, Agnes didn't dismiss me. Her voice trembled as she spoke of the festival's origins, how it once honored the earth, but a long-forgotten wrong twisted it into something sinister. She warned that the festival shouldn't just be a celebration but a ritual of appeasement for those who'd been wronged. Those who dismissed her words, she said, would soon regret it. I left her cottage unsettled. I couldn't bring any of this up at the next meeting, they'd already labeled me as paranoid. Yet, as the festival neared, accidents began to occur. One vendor's truck broke down en route, another's tent collapsed the night before the festival, and an unexplained illness swept through the children participating in the events. Whispers began to circle about Agnes again, wrapping those superstitions tighter around the town like a noose. The day of the festival arrived, and we hustled to set up booths, decorations fluttering against the wind, laughter rising like smoke into the crisp autumn air. I was lost among the chaos when I felt a chill pierce through me. I glanced up to find Agnes standing amidst the gathering crowd, her eyes locked onto me. For a moment, time stood still, and I could have sworn there was a sigh from the earth itself. The day unfolded beautifully despite the strange illnesses and accidents, the townsfolk thankfully distracted. But as dusk fell, festivities ebbed into shadows, and an uneasy tension hung thick in the air. As the sun set, the bonfire blazed, and we gathered for the traditional telling of ghost stories. Then, just as a local man began an especially eerie tale, a story of betrayal and revenge, a blood-curdling scream shattered the night. It came from the direction of the food stall. Everyone ran, and I was propelled along with the wave. There amidst the scattered booths lay an overturned pot, its contents boiling and bubbling in a way that was unnatural. The festival sweet corn had been mixed with something dark and sticky, a grotesque blend of tar. Panic washed over the crowd as we stumbled back. And then, amidst the chaos, I looked over to see Agnes, her face twisted into an expression of raw, unyielding rage. She raised her arms to the sky, the shadows around her growing long and sinister, as if drawing in the dark corners of the night itself. "You've defiled the earth," she howled, a sound that twisted my insides. "This rite can only be undone with blood." I felt my heart race as the crowd began to disperse, screams echoing through the panic. A small group of us stood there, frozen, paralyzed by her words. I mouthed at my friends to run, but as I turned back, I realized Agnes was now pointing directly at me. "It's you who must sacrifice what you love most. Or, this town will face ruin." The urgency in her voice resonated. As the sun dipped fully below the horizon, darkness draping us like a shroud. My heart sank. What did she mean? I saw my little sister, who'd been helping with the family booth, lost and confused among the chaos. In that instant, I realized Agnes's warning was not just a myth, it was real. I had to act. I screamed for everyone to run, knowing I wouldn't forgive myself if something happened to her. Gathering every ounce of courage, I ran toward the chaos, the thrumming energy in my chest pulsating with dread. Just as my sister reached the edge of the terror, I snatched her hand and sprinted from the festival, the dark echoes of Agnes haunting me every step of the way. Later, as the town attempted to pull together the pieces of that night, I heard the whispers. The children's illnesses were linked to age-old grievances of the town, their suffering a payment for years of disrespect toward the land. As for Agnes, she vanished as mysteriously as she had appeared. To this day, no one dares to mention her name aloud. We tried to carry on, but the festival has never been the same. The townsfolk refer to it now as a cautionary tale. The following year, it was decided without much mention, no more harvest festival. All I can do is wonder, did we earn our punishment through ignorance? That haunting night still grips me, reminding me each day of the web woven in secrets and the cost of our inattention. The knowledge that sometimes the past doesn't remain buried, and that the world watches, waiting for us to restore the balance we so carelessly disrupted.
When I first moved into the old apartment building on Elm Street, the landlord, a wiry man with a permanent frown carved into his sunken cheeks, pulled me aside and in a low, gravelly voice warned me about the previous tenant's strange habits. "Just mind yourself," he said, the words dripping with unspoken fear. "She'd get peculiar." At first, I shrugged it off, thinking he was just spinning a yarn to ensure I didn't mess with the place. I was young and eager, just starting a new job in the city, and the dusty charm of the apartment, complete with creaking wooden floors and peeling wallpaper, felt like a perfect refuge. But soon, whispers of the previous tenant's eccentricities began to seep through the thin walls, curling around my mind like the tendrils of smoke from my nightly candles. I started noticing things, an unsettling chill that hung in the air when the sun dipped below the horizon, faint scratching sounds at the baseboard, and the persistent feeling of being watched. My neighbors, a haggard couple from down the hall, exchanged nervous glances whenever I mentioned the spine-tingling noises, warning me to ignore it, that it was nothing more than the building settling. But their faltering eyes betrayed them. It was clear they understood something I didn't. Instead, I made it a point to explore what truly happened in that apartment before me and unearthed scraps of paper tucked beneath the floorboards. They were sequenced drawings, intricate sketches of figures draped in darkness, foreboding symbols adorned with hastily scrawled notes that hinted at rituals, sacrifices, and names that twisted my imagination with primal dread. I gathered courage and approached the landlord again, demanding to know what happened to the previous tenant. Hesitation flickered across his face, and his response was laden with grave reluctance. She believed. She believed something was watching her, something ancient that demanded attention. Always at the edge of her sight. Every night, she'd sit in front of her mirror, speaking aloud to it. Perhaps if she'd let it know she was there, it'd let her be. I couldn't shake the image of someone lost in madness, whispering to an invisible audience. That night, the scratching grew louder, clawing at my perception until I was convinced it was intent on luring me from my bed. My heart raced, echoing the rhythm of whispers surrounding me, playing tricks on my mind as I paced the narrow confines of my living room, desperately seeking a distraction. But the feeling of being watched solidified, crawling under my skin in restless waves until finally, I snapped. I grabbed the mirror from my bedroom and placed it in front of me, staring deep into the reflection, daring whatever lurked in the darkness to reveal itself. The moment I proclaimed my presence, a bone-deep chill swept through the room, and the air shimmered as though reality itself quivered. I could see the outline of something creeping just out of view, flickering like an old film projection, a silhouette that didn't belong. Panic surged. I slammed my eyes shut, gripping the table until my knuckles turned white, swallowing the nausea threatening to rise in my throat. I fought to breathe, drowning beneath the weight of my own terror until, against my will, my gaze snapped back to the glass. The reflection was no longer mine. A jumble of emotions coursed through me: despair, rage, and a hollow dread. I was staring at the previous tenant, her eyes sunken, skin drawn tight around her skeletal frame, hair wild and frazzled like a creature of the night. I wanted to look away, to flee, but her gaze bore into mine with maddening intensity, a silent plea swimming in her own litany of frantic words. It was as if she recognized me, a fleeting moment of clarity in the nightmare, and for a moment, I felt tethered to her agony. Then, with a ferocious blankness, the reflection twisted into a grotesque smile, and the soft echo of her laughter slithered around me, sending a shudder spiraling through my spine. I stumbled back, crashing into the coffee table, shattering the fragile calm of my grasp on sanity. I finally shoved the mirror away, collapsing against the wall, gasping for breath. Days passed in a haze of paranoia. I could hardly sleep, my nights spent checking locks and peering through curtains to catch glimpses of anything sinister outside. By now, the landlord had stopped visiting. Rumors spread that residents were uneasy about the atmosphere of the building, and whispers of the woman reached a fever pitch. I became obsessed with finding a record of her final moments, what drove her to insanity, or worse, what she supposedly saw. The more I dug, the deeper the abyss yawned beneath my feet. The tenant's name was to fade, but it was like hunting shadows. Each thread unraveled drew me into a world of cryptic messages and unspeakable fears. I grew resentful of my neighbors' avoidance. They had to know something I didn't, so one night, I gathered my courage and knocked on their door. They cracked it open, faces strained under the light, disheveled hair framing their haunted expressions. My persistence shattered their facade, and tears glistened in the woman's eyes as she recalled the tales of midnight screaming and the cops showing up, but always leaving, believing nothing was amiss. Then she whispered, "There's a darkness in that apartment, an emptiness it feeds off of, it's hungry." My heart sank, and before I could react, the couple's door slammed shut, leaving me standing alone in the hollow, suffocating silence. I could hear it again, the scratching escalating, gnawing at my composure, and in a moment of sheer desperation, I returned to the mirror, hoping that this time, I could confront whatever loomed behind the glass. But this time, nothing stared back. There was only the darkness, pulsating and writhing, a black void that swallowed my reflection entirely. I leaned closer, desperate for answers, but before I could fathom the enormity of what lay behind, a raspy voice slithered into my mind: "You're just like her. You see me, don't you? You feel me." The words wrapped around me like barbed wire, squeezing the breath from my lungs. I turned to run, but the walls collapsed in on themselves, the apartment twisting and contorting beyond reason. Screams clawed their way out of my throat as reality splintered, the echoes of the previous tenant's laughter ringing in my ears like a funeral toll. My escape turned into an endless spiral, a descent into her madness, with shadows that danced cruelly against the walls, whispering secrets that left scars deep inside my psyche. And as the blackness consumed me, I realized with paralyzing horror that I was no longer running away. I was becoming her, trapped between the worlds, chasing the same haunting chant that had driven her mad long before I arrived. The weight of the oppressive darkness cradled me, a womb of despair, and in that suffocating moment, the landlord's warning echoed hauntingly, reminding me that in this place, some words are best left unspoken, while others, once heard, could very well sever the fragile thread that connects sanity to the abyss.
The unexpected reunion that brought back old feelings. When I found myself back in my hometown after years of staying away, I didn't expect much to change. I told myself I was only there for a few days, helping my parents downsize before they finally moved closer to my brother. The place felt like a time capsule, as if it had been waiting for me to come back and reopen it. The same faded houses lined the streets, the same rusted swings stood in the old park, and even the same corner store still had the same old sign out front. There was a part of me that was glad everything had stayed so stagnant, unchanged and predictable, exactly as I'd left it. But then, in the grocery store parking lot, I saw her, Emma. She was leaning into the trunk of her car, struggling with a few heavy bags, her hair falling over her shoulder, the same honey blonde that I remembered, like she hadn't aged a day. My stomach twisted at the sight, the way it used to back in high school when I'd spot her across the hallway. We had dated in college, though even the word dated felt too simple, too small to capture what we'd had. She was my best friend, the person I'd planned my future with. We dreamed of living in a big city together, starting careers, maybe even starting a family someday. But life had pulled us in different directions. The distance grew too large, the calls too infrequent, and eventually, we just drifted apart. I hadn't thought about her in years, not actively at least, but there she was, standing in front of me, as real and as close as she'd ever been. I thought about slipping away before she could see me, avoiding the whole messy situation of old memories and unspoken things. But then she turned, and her eyes met mine, and for a moment, it was like we were both transported back to that last summer together, before everything had changed. Her face lit up with recognition, and she walked over, calling my name like it was the most natural thing in the world. My heart pounded as we made small talk, the typical catching up questions about jobs, family, and how long we'd both been back in town. She laughed at something I said, and for a moment, it was like no time had passed, like we could just pick up where we'd left off. It felt surreal, this encounter that I'd imagined so many times in the back of my mind, though I'd never really thought it would happen. The awkwardness wore off surprisingly fast, and before I knew it, we were reminiscing about old times, about the nights we spent sneaking out, the trips we'd taken together, the songs we used to listen to on repeat. We even laughed about the dumb arguments we'd had, those little disagreements that had felt so monumental at the time. The memories came flooding back, and with them, a wave of old feelings that I thought I'd buried a long time ago. Just as we were about to say goodbye, she suggested grabbing a coffee, almost as if it were an afterthought, something casual and spontaneous. I hesitated, part of me, thinking it wasn't a good idea, that it would only stir up things that had been better left in the past. But then, she gave me that look, the one that used to make me do anything she wanted, and I found myself saying yes. We drove to a little cafe just outside of town, one of the places we used to go when we needed a quiet spot to talk. Sitting across from her in that familiar setting, everything felt strangely intimate. We talked for hours, catching up on everything we'd missed, filling in the gaps of each other's lives. She told me about her job, her travels, her family, and I shared bits of my life, though I kept some things vague, not wanting to reveal how lost I'd been since we'd parted ways. She listened intently, her eyes never leaving mine, and I could feel the connection between us reigniting, a warmth spreading that I hadn't felt in a long time. After the cafe closed, neither of us seemed ready to leave. We ended up taking a drive, winding through the familiar roads of our hometown, places that held so many memories. We drove past our old high school, the park where we'd had our first kiss, the diner where we'd spent countless evenings, talking about everything and nothing at all. I felt a pang of nostalgia, a bittersweet ache that reminded me of everything we'd had and everything we'd lost. Finally, we parked near the lake where we used to go on summer nights. It was quiet, the moon casting a soft glow over the water, and we sat in silence for a while, both lost in our thoughts. Eventually, she broke the silence, her voice soft as she told me she'd missed this, missed me. The words hung in the air between us, heavy with unspoken emotions. I could feel my heart pounding, my mind racing with 1,000 thoughts, wondering if this was some kind of second chance, if maybe fate had brought us back together for a reason. She looked at me, her eyes filled with a longing that mirrored my own, and in that moment, it felt like we could just forget the past, all the mistakes, all the years apart. But then reality crept in, a reminder of everything that had pulled us apart in the first place. I knew that part of me wanted to reach out, to close the distance between us, to pick up where we'd left off. But I also knew that life wasn't that simple, that sometimes things happened for a reason, that sometimes people weren't meant to stay. We sat there, both of us lost in our own thoughts, the silence between us comfortable yet charged with unspoken words. Finally, she smiled, a sad but understanding smile, and told me that maybe some things were better left as memories. Her words stung, but I knew she was right. We'd both changed, grown in ways that maybe wouldn't fit together anymore, even if the feelings were still there. We talked a little more, softly, tentatively, as if we were saying goodbye all over again, but this time with a sense of closure, an understanding that we'd shared something special, something that didn't need to be reignited to be meaningful. When she finally drove away, I felt an ache, a bittersweet sense of loss, but also a strange sense of peace. I realized that sometimes, people come into our lives to teach us something, to leave an imprint that shapes who we are, even if they don't stay forever. As I watched her taillights disappear into the night, I knew that the chapter of us was finally, truly closed, and though it hurt, I felt grateful, too, for the memories, for the love, for the person I'd become because of her.
Aita for requesting an explanation for my money being spent without my consent? It started when my best friend Clara moved in with me after her breakup. She needed a place, and I genuinely wanted to help her out. We drew up an agreement: she'd cover half the bills in exchange for a cozy room and a chance to hit the reset button on life. For the first month or so, it felt natural, but as time went on, I noticed something was off. Tiny discrepancies began popping up on my bank statement: mysterious charges from restaurants I'd never visited, odd subscriptions to services I would never use. I tried to brush them off, thinking maybe I'd just forgotten a night out or signed up for something in a drunken haze. But then came the charge for a weekend getaway at a cabin, $500 withdrawn from my account. A cabin? I hadn't been on a getaway, let alone to a cabin. I confronted Clara, and her expression twisted, a veil of guilt washing over her face as she feigned ignorance, insisting she knew nothing about it. I wasn't buying it. Days passed, and the charges kept coming, little by little chipping away at my savings until I felt physically sick. Desperate to find the source of this financial drain, I decided to investigate further. I changed my online banking passwords and began checking my accounts daily, a habit that soon turned obsessive. I even set up alerts for any transactions over a certain amount, promising myself I wouldn't let this slide. One night, I was jolted awake at 3 a.m. by a notification: another charge, this time for a significant amount, over $1,000, for something labeled as VIP experience. I hadn't signed up for any VIP anything. It was then my unease morphed into a full-blown panic. My best friend was stealing from me, using my money, my trust, as if I were nothing but a candy jar for her to dip into. Tracking her every move felt like a real-life horror film, with Clara's every innocent laugh echoing like the devil's sneer, and the chilling realization settled in my stomach like a stone. I decided it was time for confrontation. The next evening, I pulled Clara aside after dinner, my heart racing and palms sweaty, and asked her point-blank if she knew anything about the charges. The room went cold, and she looked at me, eyes wide and accusing as if I had betrayed her. She dismissed my claims, spouting a rehearsed list of excuses, and all of her responses felt slimy and hollow. But what spun my head was how quickly the conversation escalated to a bizarre, almost manic insistence that I was imagining it all, that maybe I needed therapy for my paranoia. I wanted to scream, her words twisted in my mind like a mad symphony played out of key. Afterward, I began gathering evidence, printouts of my bank statements and a timeline of suspicious behavior. I found a file tucked away on my computer, an Excel sheet that cataloged every charge, every lie she told. Yet, even as I confronted her with everything I'd learned, the look in her eyes morphed into something dangerous, almost predatory. She raged and screamed, accusing me of invading her privacy, mocking my insecurities, twisting the knife deeper and deeper until I felt like I was drowning. I knew I had to get out. The next day, I informed Clara that we needed to talk again. I had gathered all the evidence I needed to cut ties once and for all. She laughed at me, a shrill, unsettling sound that bounced off the walls. "You think you can kick me out after everything I've done for you?" She sneered, though I couldn't see anything she had done as a favor. It felt like she was the personification of my worst fears, and as she spit her venom, I realized she had turned my sanctuary into a sinister plot. I thought about calling the police to report the theft, but then I hesitated. What if they didn't believe me and instead sided with her fabricated story? I decided to install a camera in the living room, just to capture her nighttime activities. I hoped it would bring some peace of mind. What I didn't expect was to discover what happened after I fell asleep. With every click of the camera, my heart pounded harder on the monitor. The footage was chilling. Each night, Clara waited until I was deep in slumber, and she'd sneak into my office. I cringed as I watched her take my credit card, oblivious to my prying eyes and hidden lens. But it didn't stop there. The footage revealed the dark ritual she partook in, her spewing soft whispers and desperate prayers to a figure beyond the edge of the frame, a shadow lurking in our home, drawing power from the transaction receipts she piled in front of a flickering candle. It was surreal, like some strange cult worshipping gluttony, and I could see her face glistening with sweat as she wove her hands in elaborate gestures. I couldn't sleep, couldn't think, and had to get out. I packed my things and rushed to a friend's house, leaving my home and all traces of Clara behind, but the nightmares followed me, featuring her haunting laughter and the shadows whispering deals based on my unpaid dues. A week later, when I thought I was safe, my friend called, her voice trembling. "You need to come back, Clara is. She's been spreading this story that you stole from her, that you did terrible things, And now all our friends think you're the villain. I reeled back, horror inching into my veins as I tried recalibrating the situation, knowing that Clara wasn't just a friend anymore, she had become something monstrous. I now knew I had to make this public. I decided to post everything online, all the evidence I had, hoping for some semblance of truth in the chaos she created. Depending on strangers made me sick, but it was all I had left. To my surprise, my story resonated. Strangers rallied behind me as the legion of comments flowed and grew, amplifying my fears and suspicions. Many even suggested I invoke the law to keep Clara from creeping back into my life, or that I delve deeper into her, uncovering whatever sinister layers lay beneath her facade. Yet even as support rolled in, I couldn't shake the feeling I had awakened something darker. Clara, losing her grip on reality, wasn't just a con artist, she had transformed into an avatar of betrayal, and I feared her next move. Since then, I have seen strange things, shadowy figures at night and unsettling noises that make me question if she has some sort of power over my life even from afar. My bank account has inexplicably ballooned and deflated, a constant ebb and flow of sinister currents that feel entwined with her waking hours. This all happened months ago, and as I watch the shadows meld into the darkness again, I wonder if I'll ever be free. Aita for wanting to know why my trust and money were exploited? Or was it simply a betrayal beyond explanation?
The time I tried to be a hero and it backfired. The time I tried to be a hero and it backfired. When I say I tried to be a hero, I don't mean the superhero, save the world type. I'm just your average person, someone who gets freaked out if I hear footsteps behind me in a dark alley or see a shadow move where it shouldn't. But that one night, I guess I wanted to step up, prove to myself that I wasn't some coward. It started as a regular Tuesday evening. I'd just gotten out of work and was taking the long way home to clear my head. I work at this tiny, dead-end office that feels more like a dungeon than a job, and I'd been wanting to shake up my life, do something that made me feel, I don't know, alive? So there I was, walking through the park, thinking about everything wrong with my life when I heard a faint scream echoing from a distance. At first, I tried to ignore it. Screams can be anything, right? Maybe someone saw a rat, or it was a couple messing around. But then I heard it again, sharper, filled with unmistakable fear, and it sent a shiver down my spine. I knew I should have just kept walking, called the cops, or even run in the opposite direction, but something inside me stirred. I wanted to help, to feel like I mattered, like I could be the one to make a difference, just this once. I followed the sound, my heart pounding harder with each step, and found myself weaving through the trees, each step crunching the gravel beneath me like an alarm telling me to turn back. It was dark, the kind of darkness that presses in on you, and the park lights barely reached the spot where the scream had come from. As I got closer, I spotted a figure, no, two figures, struggling in the shadows near the edge of a secluded path. I could barely make out what was happening, but it looked like someone was trying to pull away from the grip of a much larger man. Instinct kicked in, and before I could even think about the consequences, I shouted, "Hey! Let her go!" The man's head snapped in my direction, and the look he gave me froze me in place. His eyes were wild, filled with something dark, something dangerous, and for a second, I regretted every decision that had led me here. But then, the woman screamed again, desperate, pleading, and I couldn't just stand there like a deer in headlights. I lunged forward, grabbing the nearest thing I could find, a broken tree branch lying on the ground, and swung it at him. My aim was off, and he barely stumbled, but it was enough to get him to let go of her for a split second. She took off running, and for a moment, I felt this surge of triumph, like I was really making a difference. I'd actually saved someone. But that feeling was short-lived. Before I knew it, the guy turned his attention on me, and he was fast. Faster than I'd anticipated. He grabbed me by the collar and slammed me against the tree with a force that made my vision blur. "You just had to play the hero, didn't you?" He sneered, his voice low and filled with venom. I tried to struggle, but he had me pinned, his grip like iron, and I realized just how powerless I was in that moment. The adrenaline that had pushed me to act had vanished, leaving me with nothing but a sickening fear clawing at my insides. He leaned in close, his face barely inches from mine, and I could feel his hot, rancid breath against my cheek. "You should have walked away," he hissed, and I knew then that I was in real trouble. Panic took over, and I tried to fight, kicking, thrashing, doing anything to break free, but it was useless. He was too strong, too determined to make me pay for interfering. And then, just as I thought it was over, something strange happened. He released me. Just let go, like he'd lost interest. I stumbled back, gasping, clutching at my chest as I watched him walk away without another word. Relief flooded over me, mixed with confusion, but I wasn't about to question it. I turned and bolted, my legs moving faster than they ever had before. When I got home, I locked every door and window, telling myself I'd dodged a bullet. I wanted to believe it was over, that I'd never see him again, but deep down, I knew that wasn't true. For days, I felt like I was being watched. I'd catch glimpses of movement out of the corner of my eye, shadows lurking where they shouldn't be. At first, I chalked it up to paranoia, maybe I was just shaken up. But then I started finding things out of place around my apartment. Small things at first, like my keys being somewhere I knew I hadn't left them or the front door being unlocked when I was sure I'd bolted it. One night, I even heard footsteps in the hallway outside my bedroom. I told myself it was just my imagination, but the unease kept growing, gnawing at me. And then, one night, I woke up to find a message scrawled on my bathroom mirror in what looked like red lipstick: "You should have stayed out of it." My blood ran cold. I knew it had to be him, the man from the park, but how had he gotten into my apartment? The locks were still in place, the windows sealed tight. I called the police, but they didn't find any signs of forced entry and dismissed it as a prank. I tried to convince myself they were right, that it was all in my head, but the fear wouldn't go away. A few nights later, I woke up to the sound of someone breathing right next to me. I froze, my body paralyzed with fear, and I forced myself to open my eyes, praying it was just a nightmare. But it wasn't. There he was, standing at the foot of my bed, staring down at me with that same twisted look in his eyes. I couldn't move, couldn't scream. I was trapped in my own body, forced to watch as he leaned closer, a sick smile spreading across his face. "You thought you could play hero," he whispered, his voice dripping with malice. "But heroes always pay the price." Then he was gone, just like that, leaving me alone in the dark, trembling, my heart racing so fast I thought it might burst. I don't remember how long I sat there, staring at the spot where he'd been, too afraid to move. All I know is that something in me snapped that night. I couldn't keep living like this, in constant fear, waiting for him to come back. I decided to confront him, to put an end to this once and for all. I started searching the city, going back to the park, retracing my steps, hoping to find some clue, anything that could lead me to him. Days turned into weeks, and every night, I'd return home exhausted, only to find more signs that he'd been there. More messages on the mirror, my belongings rearranged, my nightmares bleeding into reality. I became obsessed, barely sleeping, barely eating, just driven by this need to make him stop, to get my life back. And then, one night, I found him. Or rather, he found me. I was walking down an empty street, my senses on high alert, when I felt a presence behind me. I didn't even have to turn around to know it was him. "You're really making this too easy," he said, his voice sending chills down my spine. I spun around, fists clenched, ready to fight, but he just laughed, a low, mocking sound that echoed down the street. "You should have left it alone," he said, his eyes gleaming with something sinister. "But you wanted to be a hero. Now you get to live with the consequences." And just like that, he disappeared into the shadows, leaving me standing there, shaking, defeated. I went home that night, feeling more helpless than ever, realizing that he was right. I had tried to be a hero, tried to make a difference, and now I was paying the price. My life would never be the same. When I learned the power of kindness, it wasn't in some grand display or heartwarming moment. No, it all started with a small gesture, a simple act that spiraled into something I could have never anticipated. It was a cold November evening, the kind that chills your bones and turns the air to ice. I remember huddling in my worn-out hoodie, desperately awaiting the bus that seemed perpetually delayed. The stop was empty except for me, and my thoughts were a tangled mess of worries, bills, deadlines, and feelings of inadequacy gnawing at my gut. Just when I thought I might freeze solid, I noticed an old man shuffling towards me, leaning heavily on a wooden cane. His clothes were threadbare, and his shoes looked like they'd seen better decades. As he approached, he noticed me and offered a timid smile that crinkled the deep lines of his weathered face. That small gesture broke through the gloom of my own troubles. I returned his smile, albeit weakly, and struck up a conversation. I learned his name was Harold, a local artist who had fallen on hard times but still carried a twinkle in his eye when he spoke of his passion for painting. As we talked, I felt a weight lifting off my shoulders. For once, my worries faded into the background as I listened to his stories about the vibrant art community that once thrived in our town before the economic decline. I was mesmerized by his tales of vibrant colors and creativity that lit up our dull surroundings. When the bus finally arrived, I felt like I knew the man standing by me, like somehow, I had been enriched by his presence. As I turned to leave, I reached into my pocket for a few crumpled dollar bills. "Here, Harold, take this. I know it's not much, but I hope it can help." His eyes widened, and for a moment, he looked as if he might refuse. But then he took the money, his hand trembling, and whispered a heartfelt thank you. I walked onto the bus feeling lighter than air, believing I had made a tiny difference in someone's life. That's when the eerie part began. Over the following weeks, I started running into Harold everywhere I went, at the grocery store, the park, even outside my own apartment. It was uncanny. More than that, he was always smiling, always animatedly talking to anyone who would listen about his art. It became a ritual of sorts. We would share brief conversations whenever our paths crossed. I learned more about him and the profound impact of kindness, not just the act itself, but the ripples it creates. A few weeks later, things took a strange turn. One morning, I woke up to a flood of notifications on my phone. My social media feeds were filled with posts about Harold. I clicked through to find that he had become a local sensation. Someone had taken a video of him painting murals on abandoned buildings, transforming blank walls into brilliant expressions of hope. Subtle colors danced across decayed structures, and suddenly the town that had felt so lifeless began to breathe again. People were rallying behind him, sharing his art, even donating supplies and funds for more projects. It was a grassroots effort born from his sheer will to uplift others through art, a living testament to the power of kindness. But then, things began to unravel. One evening, as I took my usual route home, I noticed something odd. The mural that Harold had painted on the side of a rundown cafe was vandalized, splashed with graffiti that read "Art is dead." I felt a cold knot form in my stomach. Pushing through the crowd gathered outside, I could see Harold standing there, his body trembling, eyes wide, looking utterly devastated. I couldn't help but rush over to him. "Harold, I'm so sorry. I don't understand who could do this." He looked at me, his face pale, and quietly said, "Sometimes, kindness attracts jealousy." I didn't understand what he meant until later that night when I scrolled through social media and saw people arguing over the vandalism. Some praised Harold's work, while others tore him down, calling him a fraud, a charlatan. And still, I thought, how could someone hate such beauty? Days passed, and Harold's spirit seemed to dim with each conversation. He would paint less, his bright smile replaced with a haunted look. I found myself resolved to stand by my friend. Together, we organized a cleanup event, inviting anyone willing to restore the murals. I spread the word online, rallying the community to come out, to show that kindness would triumph over hate. The turnout was astonishing. On that chilly Saturday morning, the once lonely streets filled with laughter, conversation, and a shared purpose. People of all ages brought brushes, paint, and food, eager to contribute. As we painted over the graffiti, Harold stood among us, visibly moved as we brought his vision back to life. The sense of unity was palpable, a stark contrast to the negativity that had blanketed our town just days before. But as the sun set that evening, something darker lurked just on the outskirts of the happiness we had created. That night, I received a frantic call from Harold. "They did it again. The mural by the old theater. Please come." My heart raced, sensing the urgency in his voice. I rushed over, and as I turned the corner, adrenaline surged through me. The mural stood untouched, but Harold was there, holding a crumpled piece of paper in his shaking hands. "They left this," he muttered, showing me the note which read, "Stop painting. Your kindness is unwelcome here." Anger flared in me like wildfire. I wanted to lash out, to find whoever had spread this senseless cruelty and confront them. Instead, I looked at Harold. "What do we do?" He thought for a moment and then slowly said, "We keep painting." The next day, we did exactly that. We unleashed a flood of color upon the streets of our town, determined to show that love could conquer hate one brushstroke at a time. We painted murals of hope, kindness, and resilience, despite the threats and condemnation we faced. And the strangest thing happened. Slowly but surely, the tide began to shift. Our movement grew larger, drawing in more and more support each day. People began sharing their own stories of kindness, sharing their art, their music, their love for each other. Kindness had become a battle cry, a movement that refused to die. I could see the change taking place, a transformation not just in our town but within Harold himself. His light began to shine again, though I could tell he still had scars from the negativity directed toward him. One night, sitting on a freshly painted bench in the midst of our latest mural, I turned to Harold and said, "Thank you for showing me this, all of this. I never realized how deeply kindness could affect others." He shot me a soft smile and replied, "It's not always smooth, but kindness is a powerful weapon. Use it wisely." From that moment, I made a vow to carry those words with me. I wanted to share the lessons I learned with everyone, even those who didn't care to hear. I wanted the world to know that even the smallest gesture could grow into something monumental. So, while the world outside might still be full of pain and hatred, I carried forth the light we had created together. I encouraged others to embrace the tenderness life has to offer, to take a moment to listen, to create, to love. Because in that chaos between darkness and light, I discovered that every time kindness blooms, it unfolds in unexpected ways, reminding us all that even a small gesture can change everything.
It all began as a seemingly innocent text from my Aunt Karen, inviting me to her baby shower, but I felt that knot in my stomach tighten when I realized the baby was the product of her hasty second marriage to a man about a decade younger than me. She had paraded him around like a trophy, insisting on posting pictures of him next to a life-size cardboard cutout of her late husband, saying they were building a new legacy, as if she wasn't burying the memory of my uncle with every cheesy Instagram post that included hashtags about love and second chances. The baby shower was a charade, a carnival of a life staged for onlookers, and I disliked it so much that I almost sent a polite declination text, but I was afraid it would hurt her feelings. Instead, I showed up to support family. When I arrived, I was assaulted by bright balloons, fake smiles, and finger foods that smelled as if they had been cooked in a century-old grease trap, and amidst the chaos, I caught a glimpse of Aunt Karen, glowing and oblivious, surrounded by her friends, women all dressed in pink, despite it being a shower for a boy. I wandered over with a half-hearted smile, clutching a ridiculously ornate gift basket filled with goods I would never buy for her, filled only with pity and obligation. As I hugged her, I recalled my uncle's funeral, how the flowers felt wilted, and how Karen had brushed off my concern about her mental health by suggesting I cheer up and focus on the silver lining. By the time we were leading into the games, where participants were required to guess the size of Karen's ever-inflating belly with string, my irritation had morphed into a seething rage. It was then that someone asked Karen the inevitable question, why she chose now to bring a new life into this world when she had barely mourned the last one, and unable to stifle my laughter, I blurted out, because she just wanted a toy to play with after the real one died. Silence engulfed the room, the air thick with tension as all faces turned toward me, the laughter growing hollow, and even the balloon seemed to sag in defeat. Karen's face fell, her smile shattered like fragile glass, and I watched as her cheeks flushed with embarrassment while Barbara, one of her friends, hissed, "What a cruel thing to say." The confrontation, however, did not stop there. My thoughts spiraled, and in my mind, I was still that awkward teenager who never felt seen, only now I was an adult wielding words like weapons, and shame mixed with guilt as I decided to lean into this train wreck of a moment and added, "I mean, what do you think the kid is for? A distraction? Something else to dote on and choke on laughter around? Plus, how can you move on with such a heavy shadow over your head?" I felt exhilaration as I picked at her insecurities, tasting every word like poison dripping from my tongue as the others collectively gasped. The room felt electric, like a storm was brewing, and Karen's hands trembled at her sides. I stepped back, blinking in disbelief, as a strange satisfaction bloomed in the pit of my gut, and in that moment, I seemed more alive than I'd ever been, energized by the unleashed chaos, but old restraint flooded in, and I realized I had taken it too far. As her eyes sparkled with unshed tears, I turned to flee the scene of emotional carnage, heart racing as I heard her voice tremble, "You were supposed to be supportive. I thought we were family." The words hit me like an icy wave crashing over my head, and for a moment, I was lost in a maelstrom of regret, trying to reconcile my anger with the crumbling image of the aunt I used to adore. That night, I contemplated whether I was right to think she was compromising her son's future existence for the sake of fleeting happiness, but the thought of never facing my family again loomed over me. I had embarrassed her in front of all her peers, but in doing so, I had also unveiled my deepest shame, the urge to lash out at someone who I perceived had wronged us all by forcing us to take on the burden of her new life path. As the days passed, the fallout became a ghost that silently haunted my thoughts. Her calls went unanswered, and I couldn't escape the notion that everything I felt had manifested into reality. Did I betray my own need for familial compassion by tearing down the shadows? I sighed into the air, a collective breath shattering the silence of my home, knowing that surely my resentment had entangled itself with my very being, a chain I couldn't break, and part of me wanted to reach out and apologize, yet the other half wanted to leave it all behind, breaking away like some tragic horror movie demo reel I couldn't stop watching. In a twisted way, I felt liberated by the knowledge that the baby shower had become a monument of collision between silence and revelation, seeping through my thoughts, reminding me that breaking down barriers came with consequences, and yet, I still couldn't shake off the anxious weight of wondering whether I had ultimately become the villain of my own story. When I was a kid, there was this animated movie called The Whispering Woods, a vibrant blend of magic and adventure that was my favorite thing in the world. The story followed a group of children who ventured into a mystical forest to rescue their friend from a sorceress. The animation was breathtaking with colors that seemed to spill off the screen, but I woke up one day and found it had vanished, no VHS, not even a trace of it online, and the strange part, no one else remembered it either, not even my childhood friends who had once gathered around my TV to watch. I started to think I might have imagined it until one night, while flipping through my parents' old, dusty boxes, I found a faded movie poster of all things. The kids were smiling beneath twisted trees under stars so vivid they felt alive, and it brought back such a rush. I could almost hear the enchanting theme song echoing in my head, a melody I had hummed countless times, but there was something odd about the poster. It had no studio listed and the release date was scrawled in faded ink, 1993. I felt a chill run down my spine, and I decided to dig deeper, researching the movie only to uncover a trail of haunting urban legends claiming it was a lost film that brought misfortune to anyone who viewed it, a cursed treasure I had stumbled upon. But I dismissed these rumors as wild coincidences and fixed my determination on tracking down a copy, even asking my parents, who grew increasingly uncomfortable at the mention of it, saying they thought it was just a dream I'd fabricated. But I knew it was real, so I persevered and scoured every inch of the internet, haunted forums dedicated to obscure cinema, and finally stumbled onto a forgotten message board, where an elderly user claimed that anyone who sought out the Whispering Woods would slowly unravel the dark truth behind its disappearance, urging me to let sleeping films lie. But my curiosity was insatiable, and after days of relentless searching, I found a link to a suspicious foreign website, promising a rare download. I hesitated but ultimately clicked, and within moments, I had the film. Though distorted and corrupted, it glitched through memory exercises, colors flickering like shadows, but soon I was transported back into the haunting tales of my childhood, and there it was, the brave children who reminded me of my friends transformed into snapshots of fear, their bravery overshadowed by lurking silhouettes and voices that warped into adults screaming the names of their children. I was mesmerized, terrifically pulled into a web of nostalgia redecorated with a horror I had never anticipated. Moments I had adored twisted into scenes of despair, and as I watched, reality began to bleed into my present, the familiar sounds of the movie melding with the unsettling quiet of my room, the laughter of children echoing only to morph into distant cries, and I could feel something groaning behind the walls of my mind, clawing to get out. The sounds of the children I once adored now tortured wails that seemed to linger in the air, refusing to evaporate. I snapped the laptop shut, but it felt futile. That dark movie ambushed my brain, forcing me into an unnerving insomnia where shadows danced in the corners of my vision, and I began hearing whispers. "Help us," they pleaded, lost children begging for a savior. So I tried to shake it off, even sought counseling, but no one could comprehend the depths of my anguish, and in my dreams, I began to see visions of those same characters, the silhouettes beckoning me toward the woods, urging me to join their twisted mission. The following day, I went for a walk to clear my mind, yet the world had grown ineffably strange. Trees towered impossibly high, their bark shifted in patterns that mirrored the faces of children, and when I closed my eyes for a moment, it was like the forest had consumed me, pulling me into a dream that felt far too real, where I found those familiar figures, lost but with something in their eyes, begging me to find the sorceress and set them free. What was once my beloved film now turned into a living nightmare, but there lingered a sense of fate, and with every night that passed, I felt closer to that forest. Its call became a siren song promising closure, and I hesitated only briefly before slipping into the woods, where I could see the faint glow of light ahead. Phantasms circled my feet, chanting words I could barely comprehend. Before long, I stumbled upon an ancient altar, the sorceress looming tall, her features echoing my mother's, youthful but warped as if caught in the throes of time, hauntingly beautiful yet frightening, eyes glistening with knowledge I wasn't meant to possess. She stared deep into my soul and whispered, "To set them free, you must sacrifice a part of your own innocence," and I realized in horror that I had to give up my childhood memories, the very essence of who I was, and in that moment, I was faced with an incomprehensible choice as the cries of children revived around me. Would I allow their screams to eternally echo through my existence, or would I bear my willingness to let go? The air grew thick with unearthly energy, memories of laughter, love, and light slipped through my fingers like grains of sand, leaving behind only fragments of despair. But as I stood at the precipice of darkness, I felt an immense pull in my gut, a spark igniting the memory of pure joy. Could I really let that vanish into shadows? What was sacrifice if it snuffed out the joy that had shaped me? I glanced at the crying children, their faces desperate, their voices pleading. Perhaps I wasn't the hero of this tale, maybe I was just another lost soul seeking solace, and with the last ounce of strength, I clung to the essence of my childhood, refusing the sorceress' desires. But the darkness roared back, relentless, as she screamed that my choice would have consequences. When I broke free from the trance, gasping for breath, I found myself back before my laptop, the program frozen, the download corrupted beyond recognition, and the movie completely lost, an endless loop of pleas hanging in the air, the truth dawning on me. The Whispering Woods was never just a film, it was a link to a shared innocence, an unnamed terror crafting illusions to lure the hearts of the vulnerable. And I knew in that moment that my past was now broken, leaving only echoes of laughter and screams swirling in my mind, the unsettling knowledge that while I could forget, the woods would never forget me.
I've always been a creature of habit. My life was a monotonous loop of wake, work, eat, sleep. It was nothing out of the ordinary, but one day, I stumbled across a post online about the benefits of morning rituals. Curiosity piqued. I thought, what the hell? And committed to changing my morning routine. The first morning was rough. I woke up an hour earlier, groggy as hell, and stumbled into the kitchen to make some herbal tea instead of my usual coffee. Standing there, sipping on that strange, warm liquid, I felt both lost and strangely liberated. I began to meditate, at least, I attempted to. The first few minutes were filled with my racing thoughts about work and bills, but I persisted, convinced that this was going to be the thing that changed my life. Little did I know, I was stepping into the unknown. After a week of this new routine, something eerie began to happen. I started having dreams, not just any dreams, but vivid, lucid ones. Each night felt like I was drifting into a new layer of reality. I dreamt about a woman behind a red door, beckoning me to come closer. There was something about her. The dreams felt so real that I would wake up in a cold sweat, the feeling of her gaze still pressing down on me. The more I committed to my changes, the more pronounced the dreams became. After a few weeks, I recognized that the dreams were connected to my routine. And then came that night, a dream unlike any other. In the dim light of the room, I entered through the red door, finding myself in a long, narrow hallway lined with portraits. Each painting seemed to depict a different version of me, living out alternate realities, lives I could have lived had I made different choices. It was both fascinating and terrifying. I walked down the hallway, looking at each picture, noticing their details, the success, the heartbreak, the victories that could have been. Just as I was absorbing it all, I noticed a flicker at the end of the hall. There she was, the woman from my dreams, standing at the end, longing for me to come closer. My heart raced. Before I could think, I found myself sprinting towards her, and just when I thought I'd reach her, the world around me began to dissolve into a hazy fog. I awoke with a start. My room was dark, and the only light came from the window. I felt an impulse, unlike anything I had ever experienced, compelling me to make a change right then and there. Exhausted but driven, I decided to go for a late-night walk, something I had never done. The streets were deserted, a cold breeze nipped at my skin as I wandered aimlessly. In my head, I replayed that dream, the portraits, the gazes, and most importantly, her. Suddenly, I found myself at the park, a quiet, sprawling place surrounded by trees that spread like festering shadows in the moonlight. Something urged me to the old swing set that creaked faintly with each breeze. I sat down, gripping the cold chains, feeling oddly comfortable. That's when I noticed a figure at the other end of the empty park, a woman standing beneath a flickering street lamp. My heart lurched painfully in my chest. Had she somehow followed me from the dream? It felt impossible, ludicrous even, but the resemblance was uncanny. The same long hair, the same piercing eyes. My instincts screamed to run, to hide, but I was rooted to the swing. She raised her arm slowly, pointing directly at me. The air thickened with an unspeakable tension. I reluctantly stood up, slowly approaching her, my mind racing, wondering if I was entering an entirely new reality. The closer I got, the clearer her features became, and then the world began to spiral. It was as if reality itself was reshaping around me. I staggered as colors swirled, the whole scenery morphed into a kaleidoscopic mess. I heard a voice, smooth but haunting, whispering my name, "You can be more than you are." The voice filled my head, echoing within the abyss of my mind, drowning out my thoughts. And then, I was in front of her, standing inches away, something radiated between us. "You've seen what could be," she said softly. My heart pounded as I stood paralyzed, the world a blur around us. "I can show you another path, a way to escape the cycle you're trapped in." A part of me wanted to reject her offer. What did it mean? Would I lose everything I had achieved, throw away my life for the unknown? But another part of me was willing, desperate for a change. My routine had been my prison, hasn't it? "Yes," I said, almost strangled by my own words. Suddenly, the ground shook, a low rumble that unnerved me. I felt the air crackle with energy as visions whipped around us, flashes of lives I hadn't lived, success, fame, heartbreak, love, the pain and joy of it all, playing out in an endless montage like a movie burned into the fabric of reality. It felt intoxicating. I could feel myself unraveling, pieces of me scattering into the infinite possibilities before me. Everything blurred, and in an instant, I was swept away, leaving fragments of my old self behind, welcoming the unknown with open arms. I awoke the next morning in my own bed, drenched in sweat, a pounding in my head. Nothing seemed different at first, just my familiar surroundings. Then I glanced at my clock and shot upright, time felt strange, unsteady. I rushed to the window, looking outside as if expecting to see something different. My heart raced as I caught sight of the street below, colors appeared more vibrant, there was an energy in the air. I stepped outside, the world felt lighter. I engaged with every passerby, every interaction ignited something within me. I wasn't just living, I was thriving. But then, the eerie feeling of being watched crept back. In the corner of my mind, a voice echoed, "You can change it all, just like that." Time seemed fluid, and suddenly, I grasped that the changes I had made weren't just a routing improvement, they were the beginning of a new narrative, a timeline that rippled with endless possibilities. For weeks, I embraced this newfound energy, stepping into opportunities, embracing risks, and connecting with people I would have previously shied away from. But there was a price, wasn't there? I began to notice subtle shifts, the shadows lengthening, a pervasive sense of anxiety creeping back in, memories resurfacing like ghosts. I realized that in pursuing alternate realities, I had inadvertently fractured my own. Each choice left behind a piece of me, and slowly, night terrors returned, revisiting vivid dreams where that red door remained ajar. I could feel the woman's presence every night, drawing me back towards her, taunting me with possibilities I had yet to experience but had once forsaken. The thrill of the change began to weigh heavily. One night, I found myself at that park again, standing at the same swing set, feeling her gaze from the shadows. "You chose," she whispered, the sound threading through my mind like poison. "But did you choose wisely?" I felt her presence closing in, the fragmented pieces of my former self circling like vultures. "You will pay for every decision, every moment." Just then, the shadows deepened, and I felt like I was back at the precipice of that red door, now more menacing than ever. I could either wade deeper into this altered reality or find a way to reclaim what was mine. Realizing that I couldn't escape the consequences of my choices, I understood then that life is a delicate balance, and for every change made, there is a cost, a threaded path that entwines every facet of existence into an intricate weave of light and darkness. The morning routine that once helped me escape stagnation now felt like an inescapable labyrinth. After that night, I altered my approach. Instead of running towards the changes, I began to embrace them gradually, careful not to lose myself in the process. I focused on grounding myself, on cherishing the present and the relationships I had nurtured. Eventually, the dreams receded, and though the woman remained a part of my memory, I realized she was not a specter of regret to haunt me but a reflection of potential, an echo of every choice I could make. With every dawn that broke, I learned acceptance rather than racing towards what could have been. So, as I sit here telling you this tale, I hope you see that the tale of change is not one of simple choices but a dance, a tightrope of fate where every step you take creates ripples in the tapestry of your life. Be careful how you tread, for every routine is a doorway, each decision a threshold to an uncertain realm, making sure you don't lose yourself in the echoes of what could have been. I survived the journey, only to realize change isn't an end, but a path, with every moment, every choice sculpting the life you mold. But beware, the more fervently you chase the unfamiliar, the more alluring and treacherous the echoes of your own psyche can become. I never thought I was particularly strong, mentally or physically, but that changed the night I was trapped in my own home. It was supposed to be a normal evening. I had just settled into bed with a book after a long day at work. As I read, a storm began to roll in, heavy rain and gusting winds lashing against the windows. The power flickered and then went out, drenching my room in darkness. At first, I fumbled for my phone, thankful for the flashlight feature, thinking it would be a minor inconvenience. But as the wind howled outside and the rain pelted against my window, I started to feel uneasy. Living alone for the past few years, I had mastered the art of solitude, thriving in it even. But that night, the shadows seemed to weave into something more sinister. I tried to shake off the odd feeling, reminding myself it was just a storm. But as the hours wore on, my mind began to spiral. I heard strange noises from the living room, creaks that sounded more pronounced in the dark. I convinced myself it was just the house settling. I focused on my breathing, reminding myself that I was safe, that I could handle this. But then came the tapping, soft, rhythmic, insistent, like fingers drumming against a surface. My heart raced. I thought it was just the wind playing tricks. I mustered the courage to walk to the living room, every step a fight against the rising fatigue and mounting dread. With each step, the tapping felt more like a beckoning, as if something on the other side of the door wanted me to approach. I reached the entrance to the living room, and everything went silent, like the world was holding its breath. The darkness felt thick, cocooning me, pressing against my skin. I fumbled for the light switch, but of course, nothing happened. With my phone's dim light, I scanned the room, anxiety bubbling under my skin. It was then that I noticed a shadow flicker just past the window, something tall and thin. My heart skipped a beat. My gut told me to run, but fear had me rooted to the ground. Just then, the tapping returned, accompanied by a low whisper that almost melded with the storm outside. "Let me in," it hissed, wind-choked and desperate. "You can't leave me out here." A chill traveled down my spine. I wanted to scream, to run back into my room and hide under the covers, but something in that voice made me stay. It was familiar, but I couldn't place it. I ventured closer to the door leading to my front porch, each step feeling heavier. "Let me in," it begged again, softer this time, with a tone that seemed to claw at the edges of my mind. I felt as if the shadows were stretching toward me, wrapping around my legs, urging me forward. I balanced on the precipice between terror and curiosity, fighting against any sense of rationality. I mustered a whisper, "Who are you?" The whisper morphed into a wail, full of anguish, and that's when I remembered. That was my voice. My own wretched cries echoed from outside, as if I had been written off, discarded by a version of myself I didn't even recognize. "Help me," it sobbed. "I just want to come home." It felt like a spell had been cast, and I was trapped in it. The realization hit me like ice water. I had been battling depression for years. This was the embodiment of it, my mental struggles taking a physical form, haunting me outside my own threshold. The reason I felt weaker than I thought was that I had been fighting a ghost of my own being for far too long, feeling so utterly alone in this debilitating battle. I didn't just want to let the voice in, I needed to confront it, to find the strength I hadn't realized was deep within me. Gathering steely resolve, I flung open the door. The storm burst in, chaotic and powerful, yet utterly still in that moment as I faced the shadow, the dark reflection of my turmoil, a twisted manifestation of all my fears and failed attempts at healing. I took a deep breath, allowing the rain to soak me, a cleansing wave washing away the remnants of apathy that had held me bound. "You don't control me anymore," I said, my voice steady. The figure trembled, flickering like a candle nearing extinction. "You can't keep me locked away," I declared, standing as firm as I could. It wavered, caught between despair and uncertainty. "I was never meant to be part of you. I am stronger than this." Suddenly, there was a bright flash of lightning, illuminating the scene for just a heartbeat. The shadow abated, shrinking back as if the light pierced it, leaving only a whisper, then set me free. That was the catalyst I needed. I reached out, palms open, and the shadow recoiled slightly but didn't retreat completely. "I'm no longer afraid of you," I said. "I understand you now." The rain poured heavier, washing away the darkness that had seeped into my bones. I forced myself to give one last push. "You're a part of me, but you don't own me." As the words left my mouth, the shadow started to dissolve into swirling mist. It attempted to linger, to hold on to the weight of my despair, but I wouldn't let it. I felt warmth replace the cold dread, something stirring inside me, a flicker of strength that began to radiate outward. The mist twisted and turned until it evaporated into nothingness, leaving behind tranquil air, as though the storm had passed. Suddenly, the lights flickered back on, illuminating the path I had just walked. I stood alone in my living room, soaked, but an odd sense of liberation washed over me. In that moment, I realized I was far stronger than I had ever thought possible. The struggle wasn't over, but I finally felt armed with the knowledge I needed. I could fight back. I closed the door behind me firmly and leaned against it, breathing deeply, the sound of my own heartbeat a solid reminder of my resilience. It was more than just a metaphorical battle, it had been real, and I emerged victorious. From that night on, every time apprehension crept in, I would remind myself of that moment, the moment I realized I was stronger than I thought, stronger than all the storms life could throw at me. And maybe that strength was something worth sharing, something every person fighting an unseen battle should know.